Let's start off with something bizarro. Vietnam and high, humanoid, strangeness in wartime. There are few periods in world history that become murkier than those during which conflict erupts. Within this already darkened jurisdiction of past studies, perhaps no era is quite so strange and troubling as those years during which the infamous Vietnam conflict had been waged. Falling between the final years of the 1960s, the United States became embroiled in the conflict with the intention of aiding South Vietnam, and of course, to bolster the ongoing effort toward the spread of democracy in parts of the world still riddled by communism. So far as historic periods of conflict are concerned, Vietnam is indeed remembered as one of the darker periods in history. And within its shadows of obscurity, there are nonetheless a number of curious accounts and seldom spoken mysteries which have prevailed over the years, begging questions as to what kinds of odd operations might have been taking place behind the scenes, so to speak. That is, of course, if such strange stories can be believed. Indeed, some of the more bizarre accounts from the Vietnam years are so strange, they might likely fall beyond the jurisdictions of what can even be considered believable. And yet, the stories persist. Which include accounts of friendly giants, glowing non-humans, and winged wonder women drifting about the deep jungles by cover of night. The stories of strange humanoid beings appearing during the Vietnam conflict are many and varied, with one of the more memorable accounts stemming from the summer of 1969, near the Da Nang province, where Earl Morrison and his company witnessed something truly out of the ordinary. He and his two companions had been stationed during a watch above a bunker near the city of Da Nang, when they three of them began to notice a strange figure moving toward them from overhead in the distance. It looked like a woman. A naked woman. She was black. Her skin was black, her body was black, the wings were black, everything was black. But it glowed. It glowed in the night, kind of a greenish cast to it. There was a glow on her and around her. Everything glowed. Looked like she glowed and threw off a radiance. We saw her arms toward the wings and they looked like regular molded arms, each with a hand, and fingers and everything, but they had skin from the wings going over them. And when she flapped her wings, there was no noise at first. It looked like her arms didn't have any bones in them, because they were limber just like a bat. She started going over us, and we still didn't hear anything. She was right above us, and when she got over the top of our heads she was maybe 6 or 7 feet up. We couldn't do anything. We didn't know what to do. We just froze. We just watched what was going over because we couldn't believe our eyes. So we watched her go straight over the top of us, and still she didn't make any noise flapping her wings. She blotted out the moon once, that's how close she was to us. As we watched her, she got about 10 feet or so away from us. We started hearing her wings flap. And it sounded, you know, like regular wings flapping. And she just started flying off and we watched her for quite a while. The total time when we first saw her and could almost define her until we lost sight of her and were unable to define her was between 3 or 4 minutes. Fortean researcher John Keel featured this strange story in his book, The Mothman Prophecies, as it obviously appeared to detail the presence of a large, winged humanoid, similar to later reports of a creature allegedly seen around Point Pleasant, West Virginia, around the same time. There were, however, other reports of so-called mystery beings seen during the Vietnam years. In his book UFOs in Wartime, author Mac Maloney recounts a curious story where one soldier claimed he was saved by a giant that appeared and attacked an approaching enemy. As this rather odd and whimsical story goes, the witness claimed to have been assisting a landed helicopter, which subsequently took off after being repaired, leaving the witness slightly disoriented and, eventually, lost in the jungle. Soon afterward, he would claim that he heard the voices of oncoming Vietnamese soldiers, and just as one had attempted to confront him, he heard a loud crack, followed by the appearance of the dead enemy soldier in front of him. There, behind the dead would-be assassin, stood an 8-foot-tall giant, dressed perfectly and clad in an odd-looking helmet, who told him to return to his helicopter. Not all reports of encounters with beings during the Vietnam years were quite so benevolent, however. One story, shared in Martin Keiden's book Natural or Supernatural, detailed a peculiar story the author claimed to have collected from one GI, who along with his company, made the claim of having met a group of terrifying, glowing yellow humanoids that were impervious to gunfire. The story had been related to Keiden by a U.S. Marine calling himself David E. Gower, having allegedly transpired on December 17, 1974 while serving the 5th Special Forces Group, Marine Detachment. It had been an ambush, and Gower and his team had been carried upriver by boat, and deployed carrying Browning automatic rifles, a .45 caliber Thompson subgun, 4 M16 rifles and an M79 grenade launcher. As Gower and his company traveled along, they reached a clearing where they found that none of the usual outdoor sounds, not even the familiar sound of insects common to the humid jungle landscape, could be heard. At this time, one of the soldiers became aware of a large deposit of strange-looking fecal matter. Shortly thereafter, the soldiers claimed to see at least 3 large, yellow ape-like beings emerge from the nearby forest. These creatures were between 7 and 8 feet tall, yellow in color, and glowing. At first, Gower and his company remained concealed, but upon initiating a retreat, were then pursued by these beasts, which Gower claimed were essentially impervious to the heavy fire of their weaponry. Miraculously, Gower and his company said they made it back to their boats, and claimed that the entire way back down the river, they were able to see the bright glowing in the distance along the shoreline, presumably emanating off the bodies of these terrifying creatures. Can such strange claims of encounters with mystery humanoids be taken as anything more than mere myth and fantasy? While the claims of soldiers during times of conflict may lend themselves to a bit less scrutiny than those of the average witness, many of these stories are simply so bizarre that to take them literally might force one to change his or her entire conception of what constitutes reality. So what can be made of tales like these? Are they perhaps the best evidence for mystery humanoids in our midst, by virtue of having been reported by various officers during the Vietnam conflict? Or are they simply proof that a teller of tall tales will go to great lengths to fabricate a good story, and despite their professional disposition? Indeed, as we see here, it begins to become hard to tell at time. Exploring American Monsters. Connecticut. One of the first 13 British colonies in North America, Connecticut revels in American patriotism, demonstrated by its nickname the Constitution State. Heck, its state song is Yankee Doodle. Although it's the 3rd smallest of the United States by area, 110 miles long and 70 miles wide, it's the 4th most densely populated, and, with 1.9 million acres of forest land, Connecticut can still hide plenty of monsters. Like this doggy, the black dog of Hanging Hills. Just north of the downtown of Meriden in southern Connecticut are the Hanging Hills, which run through Hubbard Park, a 1,800-acre mountainous area on the National Register of Historic Places. Covered in a forest broken by cliffs and rocky outcroppings, this land is the romping place of the black dog. The first reported sighting of the black dog by someone other than a local was in the late 1890s when a geologist visited the Hanging Hills and discovered a medium-sized black dog followed him. The dog remained with the geologist the entire day, neither barking nor whining, and when the scientists started to leave, the dog, which he was happy to have along on his day of hiking, vanished. Locals, he later discovered, knew of the black dog, and although its first and second visits were pleasant, the third sighting of the dog was anything but. On a second trip 3 years later, the geologist saw the dog again. A companion, however, had been to the area before, and for him this was the third. Legend has it the third time seeing the black dog means a death knell. The geologist's companion soon after fell off a cliff to his death. Melon heads. Something terrifying with a taste for human flesh lurks in backwater areas across Connecticut, something small, the melon heads. These small humans with huge heads, bulging eyes, and wiry limbs lurk in the woods, and prey upon passers-by. Claimed to be everything from incestuous backwoods rednecks to descendants of colonial witches, the melonheads live in the forest, and bite people who dare tread on their territory. In Fairfield County, Connecticut, the melonheads are supposedly inbreed cannibal offspring from around 20 insane asylum patients that escaped when a fire destroyed the asylum, and killed the administration, staff, and most of the patients, according to a story in the Torrington, Connecticut, Register Citizen. Although more of an urban legend than actual monsters, the melonheads cause travelers on the lonely, tree-covered country roads in rural Connecticut drive just a little bit faster. Sea monsters. Reports of sea monsters off the coast of Connecticut have existed since the early European colonization of New England. Most sightings were of long, snake-like creatures, some with bodies as wide as a horse, with a big black head as large as a flour barrel, and with eyes as big as small plates. The serpents were said to be 40 to 100 feet long. One sighting reported in a 1881 article in the New York Times: a huge serpent, green with black spots, swam by a yacht out for a pleasure cruise, scaring the bejesus out of those on the boat. But serpents aren't the only monsters seen off the Connecticut coast. In 1895, Captain Obadiah Donaldson wrote that his ship collided with an octopus just off the coast, an octopus more than 60 feet wide with arms stretching at least 100 feet, according to the July 17, 1895 Chicago Tribune. Like a scene from Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. The monster wrapped one of its tentacles around the ship and began to drag it down, under the sea. A sailor named Frank Taylor chopped through the monster's arm with a meat cleaver, and the beast sank beneath the waves once more. Glastonbury Glowacus. During the unusually cold winter month of January 1939, the residents of Glastonbury, Connecticut, had something to worry about besides the snow: the Glastonbury Glowacus. This howling beast terrorized the night that winter. A furry monster the size of a large black dog with the face of a cat, slaughtered small dogs, goats, and sheep, according to a story in the Hartford Courant. Hunters combed the forests and hills with dogs. The dogs occasionally chased something unseen through the brush, but the Glowacus remained elusive. Some claimed it was a mountain lion escaped from a zoo, or a Canada lynx in the area, but a hunter from Hartford, William F. Bonvilloir, encountered the beast. He saw a beautiful black creature about 3 feet long with a tail 2 feet long leap out of the scrub wood, according to the Courant. He shot at it twice with a 12-gauge shotgun, but missed both times. As evidence of a monster near Glastonbury dwindled by that next July, hunters killed a big, brown wild dog, and claimed the end of the Glowacus, although many residents of Glastonbury had their doubts. Spring-heeled jack in America. In the night the world reveals its second nature and weird things stir and start to wander. Strange shapes hide in architectural and unlit dead zones. As has been done for centuries, darkness reawakens terrible presences in those places. Whether a hedge, fence, or row of abandoned buildings, whether a narrow winding path in a distant past or the alienating cityscape of today, it is the territory of the scare. Such a fright is Spring-heeled Jack. He was born out of similar surroundings almost 2 centuries ago, and this article chronicles its presence in America. Spring-heeled Jack, the fire-belching phantom known for its ability to execute impossibly high leaps, is a singular figure in the annals of the anomalous. Premier Spring-heeled Jack researcher Mike Dash traces the complex origins of the phantom in a series of partially overlapping ghost scares with names such as the Hammersmith Ghost, the Hammersmith Monster and the Park Ghost, that infested London and its environs in 1803. Beginning of 1804, an English newspaper picked up on these unusual occurrences and published accounts of encounters with a ghostly apparition said to have eyes like a glowworm and breathing fire and smoke. In 1825 the London suburb of Hammersmith was again plagued by a fire-belching spectre. Spring-heeled Jack's progeny appeared in various shapes. They were seen around London as a harnessed phantom, as a black bear, as shrouded ghosts with fiery eyes with or without horns and occasionally belching flames. From this brief sketch it is clear that at this date a specific image of Spring-Heeled Jack still had to galvanize in the newspapers and in the minds of the inhabitants of London and its environs. This would come in February 1838 with the often repeated account in the Times. It published the now famous name Spring-Heeled Jack to a wide audience, together with a graphic description by Jane Alsop, who was attacked by the phantom. She described how Spring-Heeled Jack appeared enveloped in a long cloak. He threw off his outer garment, and applying the lighted candle to his breast, presented a most hideous and frightful appearance, and vomited forth a quantity of blue and white flames from his mouth, and his eyes resembled red balls of fire. From the hasty glance which her fright enabled her to get of his person, she observed that he wore a large helmet, and his dress, which appeared to fit him very tight, seemed to her to resemble white oil skin. In the years to come, similar scares erupted in different places in England well into the 20th century, such as in Bradford, 1926, Warrington, 1927, and at Turcliffe, 1973. But it is not a thing of the past. According to an English newspaper just last year, a family was traveling home by taxi when they saw a mysterious dark figure with no features dart across the road in front of them before leaping 15 feet over a roadside bank. The earliest suggestion that Spring-Heeled Jack had crossed the Atlantic and had taken root in America was published in 1961. The theory was presented in a speculative article on Spring-Heeled Jack by one J. Viner that was published in Flying Saucer Review and in Fate, the monthly magazine on various Fortean and supernatural phenomena. Lacking sources or references, it did offer a small collection of cases, out of which 3 concerned alleged Spring-Heeled Jack sightings in America. The article became an influential source for subsequent authors on the topic of Spring-Heeled Jack in America, who incorporated Viner's cases in their writings. The effect was that this otherwise highly interesting idea could not be further developed, since the examples listed by Viner have nothing to do with the Spring-Heeled Jack phenomenon and cannot be taken as examples of a similar presence in America. Viner not only added the unrelated Mad Gasser of Mattoon scare to the lore of Spring-Heeled Jack, the other cases presented were an entirely different form of anomaly as well. They are not concerned with agile, jumping and fire-belching creatures, but instead offer sightings of flying men, engaged in none of the activities that Spring-Heeled Jack was famous for and were formative towards his unique signature. Later writers simply repeated this error. The consequence was that for decades there was no progression in charting any presence of Spring-Heeled Jack in America. This fascinating topic had stranded in a cul-de-sac and knew of no further exploration. Stagnation set in and its true history remained unknown. Fascinated by the possibility that a similar phenomenon was active in the United States, I set out anew to try and find cases that more fully answered the descriptions of Spring-Heeled Jack, in the various digitized newspaper archives available online. With a selection of my findings, I propose a new preliminary list, consisting of alleged events, sightings, and encounters with entities in America that feature one or more attributes of the Spring-Heeled Jack typology. The list below, a longer version of which was published in 2007, is by no means all-encompassing nor conclusive. Since then I have collected many more cases on file. I have written at length about some of these, such as the Black Flash of Provincetown, Anomalous 13, 2007, and the New Hallville Terror, Dark Lore 4, 2009. Another entity falling in this category is the Phantom of O'Donnell Heights. This mysterious entity terrorized the southeast Baltimore neighborhood during a 2-week period in the summer of 1951. It is not on my list since it has been treated elsewhere online and in print. My sample list of 9 new cases between 1885 and 1927 demonstrates what we can expect, though, looking for Spring-Heeled Jack in America. I also expect that, as more and more newspapers digitize their old issues, eventually other forgotten cases will emerge. As to the truthfulness of the accounts listed below, who can tell? 19th century American newspapers had a distinct way of presenting outright yarns, tall tales, and hoaxes, as it was not considered unethical or beneath the standards of journalism. In some cases one almost feels a subtle sense of humor that would, of course, have been very much appreciated by a 19th century reader of these accounts. That very subtlety which to us, now, is lost. So we are left to ponder, did those residents in Alma really see a beautiful lady in lingerie or an elephant with fire sprouting from its trunk? What matters more is not so much the veracity of these claims and statements, but rather the way these ghosts, spirits, and hauntings were given certain attributes, such as leaping to great heights, emitting fire, and otherwise engaging in acts not unlike those of Spring-Heeled Jack. As any researcher involved in this kind of research realizes, the distinct typology of ghosts, entities, spirits, specters, and apparitions and their folkloristic overlaps with UFO occupants, cryptozoological marvels, and biological impossibilities is difficult to sort out. There is a general tendency to just lump various anomalies together. Precision is the keyword, while I find more and more forgotten flaps, reports and events in old, long since defunct newspapers that excited, amazed, and frightened whole neighborhoods, towns and generations. 1885, The Dancing Ghost on the Church, Lawrence, New York. In December 1885, the people of Lawrence, an aristocratic quarter of recent creation near Far Rockaway, were mystified and puzzled by the appearance of a specter in the belfry of the Methodist Episcopal Church. Men gathered in dark places every night to observe the strange sight. It flits about the belfry in the most nimble fashion, one time ascending to the apex of the steeple and at another executing a dance on the slanting roof. It plays hide and seek in the lattice work of the bell room, enlarging and decreasing in size according to the angle of observation. A remarkable thing is that it never appears on a Sunday night. Every night scores of persons walk or drive to the vicinity of the Lawrence Church to verify it. Some of these declare that the specter has followed them home and hung around their residences for hours. Last Saturday night the strange figure was more than usually active, and scores of persons kept their eyes fixed on it until, benumbed by the cold, they were driven home. Half the village declares that at precisely 10 o'clock the bell was tolled. Immediately after the tolling, 3 hearty amens were heard, and then the specter flattened itself out on the roof. After a few minutes there was seen the liveliest skipping in and out of the lattice work, and then the phantom ran up and down the surface of the steeple, concluding by perching on the top, and disappearing in the direction of the graveyard. 1885, The Fire-Spitting Ghost of Long Island. After a rest of 5 years, a specter with a tongue of fire has reappeared on the old Centerville racecourse, just south of Woodhaven, and men and women congregate every night to witness the strange sight. His ghost ship appears promptly at 9:45 o'clock and departs at 12 minutes after 11. There is a dispute whether the ghost wears a robe of white or a garment more the color of sheep's wool. But on one other point there is no disagreement: the ghost spits fire like a foundry chimney and leaves a sulphurous odor behind it. It moves along space like a feather in the wind, going a zigzag course. At regular intervals it spits fire. Scores of persons have followed in its wake without getting close enough for personal contact, and all declare that when the ghost comes to stop, it invariably says, "Whoa." 1889, The Graveyard Ghost That Darted Fire Out of Its Eyes, Wading River, Long Island. They have a lively ghost at Wading River. This Wading River specter keeps perfect silence and strikes terror to the beholders by darting fire at them out of its eyes. The figure's dress is smoky in color instead of pure white. At 11:55 p.m. the ghost appears in the churchyard and jumps around in the liveliest possible way, apparently trying to read the inscriptions on the tombstones and locate itself properly. At precisely 12 o'clock, m. the figure mounts to the top of a stone, lets go 12 fiery darts and disappears from view entirely. It rarely appears or disappears at the same point twice, and the startled people do not know where to look for it, but they have no difficulty in locating it when the moments for the earth to open up and reveal the messenger from Sheol arrives. They say that long before the fiery object took to practicing athletics in the graveyard it could be discerned playing hide and seek in the church belfry, and on one occasion the bell was rung violently at midnight. 1892, The Fire-Spitting Ghost of Raymond Street, Brooklyn, New York. The good people living on Raymond Street in the vicinity of the jail are greatly excited over the reported visitation of an inhabitant of the other world that has been seen in and around the jail. A colored youth standing hard by was observed to remark, while his eyes danced with excitement. It was a great big thing, 7 or 11 feet high, all dressed in white, with horns on its head. A businessman in the immediate vicinity said, "Those who have seen it probably imagined it. I have heard it described as being anywhere from 7 to 12 feet high, dressed in white. Some say with fire shooting out of its mouth." 1897, The Leaping Ghost with the Lantern of Auburn, New York. Auburn, New York, August 5. Hundreds of people have been greatly annoyed by the antics of a new kind of ghost. It is in the habit of appearing at 1 o'clock at night, and is tall, clothed in white and carries a lantern. It does not glide, as most specters do, but bounds like a kangaroo. Rising from the center of the oat field a strange apparition, it was apparently the figure of a man clothed entirely in white. The ghostly figure stalked across the oat field, swinging a lantern in its hand. It advanced to the fence facing the round, and after flourishing his lantern up and down several times like a brakeman signaling a railroad train, the white figure gave a tremendous bound into the air and vanished from sight. About 10 o'clock the ghost appeared, carrying his lantern with him. The specter made its appearance, apparently rising from the ground at the foot of a beech tree which stands at the west end of the field. The white-robed figure dodged in and out, seen at 1 minute, the next lost to sight. After continuing his performance for a few minutes, the figure advanced boldly toward the astounded spectators. It came on with a bounding movement, similar to that made by a kangaroo while in motion. When within a few feet of the spectators, the ghost stood motionless for a second, and after waving the lantern in the air 3 or 4 times, suddenly vanished from sight. Near Hillsboro, in western Indiana, there is a strip of wild, hilly country known as Red Hills, which for several years, according to the stories of reputable and reliable people, has been haunted by a headless ghost. Quite recently 2 farmers, driving through the hills after nightfall, were attacked by the ghost, which jumped into their wagon. Both deserted their team and fled in wild dismay. More recently a gang of coon hunters were stampeded, and none of them can be again persuaded to venture in that locality after night. Other people profess to have seen the same apparition, which came bounding toward them, frequently leaping 10 and 15 feet into the air, but disappearing when close at hand. Recently, William Pithud, a farmer, makes declaration that as he was driving homeward the ghost appeared, armed with a huge club, and began belaboring his horses. Pithud jumped out and fled in terror, never stopping until he reached the home of Harry Barton, who armed himself with a rifle and furnished Pithud with a weapon. Together they returned to the scene of action, and they found the horses lying in a ditch, quivering with terror and showing every indication of having had a rough time. 1908, The Fire-Spitting Elephant Ghost of Alma, Colorado. Alma had a sensation this week in the shape of a ghost, which appeared at night. People coming from the saloons about midnight saw a strange sight, or imagined they did. One night the phantom was seen near the Thomas Saloon, another time it was at the bridge, on Main Street. The courageous Almaites gave chase, but when they arrived at the spot the apparition had mysteriously disappeared. Some describe it as a beautiful woman, clad in the finest white lingerie. The spot where the beauty disappeared was fragrant with the perfume of roses and violets. Others again say it looked to them like a huge elephant, with streams of fire issuing from its trunk, and when they arrived at the spot where it had vanished, the smell of sulfur and brimstone permeated the air. The young ladies of Alma are frightened and will not venture forth in the evening without an escort. The gallant young men act with the greatest of pleasure in this capacity. So far, the spook has not been caught, but if this should be the case, would summarily be dealt with. 1909, The Devil in Black of Georgetown, Delaware. More than 7 feet in height and swathed in a long black cloak, closely wrapped around its face, a new mystery has been exciting some parts of Georgetown, where it has followed women and young girls and jumped out from behind trees at them. The Devil in Black, as it is called, first appeared several nights ago, when a dozen or so persons saw it during the course of the evening. From behind a tree it jumped at Mrs. William Curdy and sent her screaming with fright into a neighbor's house, while a daughter of Joseph Carnal also was chased by the mysterious stranger until she fell almost fainting into Fred Rust's grocery store. The men of the neighborhood, informed of the affair, led by William Curdy, ran across fields, jumped fences, and through backyards, with the devil but a few yards ahead of them, but, while crossing the big ditch known as the Savannah, the figure completely disappeared and, despite search, could not be found. Again it was seen by several young girls, and last night it made its appearance and was seen closely by Mrs. Carn Josephs, who heard a noise as she passed her woodshed. She turned to look and distinctly saw the devil walk out of the shed and after her. Almost fainting with fear she ran screaming into the house, while her husband ran into the yard with his gun and fired at the tall figure, which was plainly distinguished at the woodshed. In a second it was gone with no trace of injury from the gun. Many superstitious declare that bullets cannot hit it, but some of the more determined men declare it is the work of a practical joker and expect to put a load of shot into it at their first opportunity. 1927, the black-robed entity from the murder house, Oakland, California. The people of Oakland are pretty well convinced that a house where a murder was committed last week is haunted. The experience of a certain electrician as recounted by the worthy AP was terrifying enough. John Smith, electrician, said he passed the murder house recently and a tall, heavy-set man, garbed in a gown like a black kimono and wearing a strange-looking thing on his head, walked out and started after him. Smith said he ran as fast as he could. The context is that the house was the crime scene of the gruesome murder of the 15-year-old schoolgirl Mabel Meyer, a murder that got nationwide coverage and remains unsolved to this very day. Exploring American Monsters, Alabama. We all love monsters. Something about an unknown creature, hairy or scaly, huge or small, living amongst us, unknown to science, is unsettling at best, terrifying at worst, and it is exhilarating. This is the first in a series of articles about monsters from each state in America, but not the well-worn monsters. I won't cover Champ, the Jersey Devil, or Mothman. I'll also leave Missouri's Momo alone, as well as Arkansas's Fouke Monster, and the Chupacabra. This series is about the lesser-known critters that crawl through our nights, and stalk the periphery of the human world. Every state has reports of these less publicized, but inherently frightening monsters, most of which have something seriously wrong with them. Like this monster from our first state, Alabama, the Alabama White Thang. Reports of the White Thang, yes, Thang. Remember, this is Alabama, date back to the 1930s, and reports of the monster vary. It has been described as everything from a dog to a Bigfoot to a ghost. But two things are constant: the monster's long white hair, and its scream. In the book, Legends and Lore of Birmingham and Central Alabama, by Beverly Crider, George Norris, an eyewitness in the 1940s, saw the monster, and it looked like a lion. You know, bushy, betwixt a dog and a lion. It was white and slick with long hair. It had a slick tail, down on the end of the tail a big bush of hair. The monster, although in the 1930s was said to run on all fours, even climbing trees to wait for people to walk beneath it, in later decades has been described as upright and at least 7 feet tall, although witnesses say they can't make out any detail of the monster, like hands or facial features. But it's not the beast's appearance or behavior that causes fright. People who've encountered the White Thang say it's non-threatening. The monster's scream is what shatters people's spirits. The shriek, like a woman or a baby crying, not only barks in the dark woods at night. Witnesses have heard the sound come from the hulking, white-haired monster as it loomed over them and screeched into their face. The Wampus Cat. When residents of Trussville, Alabama, began to discover their pet cats and small dogs slaughtered by an animal in 2014, official thoughts went to coyotes, but according to the Mobile, Alabama, Press Register, canines didn't match eyewitness reports. One unnamed witness told the newspaper, "Several of the residents have confirmed it is a feline creature. It jumps tall fences and is extremely quick." Thoughts of Trussville citizens went to one cause, the Wampus cat. This spectral panther-sized beast has been reported across the American Southeast for centuries. Although there are numerous legends about the origin of this cat, the following two are most common in Alabama. The first legend comes from an American Indian tradition. A Cherokee woman, suspicious of her husband's hunting trips, dressed in the skin of a mountain lion, and followed the hunting party into the woods. She came upon the hunters sitting around a fire listening to stories about magic. She hid, staying to hear these stories that were forbidden to women. The men discovered her, and cursed her to spend eternity as a half-woman/half-mountain lion. The second legend is slightly more modern, but just as magical, or at least well-shown. According to the McDowell News of Marion, North Carolina, during World War II, the United States military succeeded in crossbreeding mountain lions and gray wolves in rural Alabama in an attempt to create a species of intelligent, vicious creatures to use as messengers in a war zone. Okay. A few males and females of this new species escaped the military compound, and began to breed in the wild, becoming known as the Wampus cat. Or maybe the Wampus cat is just a mountain lion, although Kevin Dodd from the Alabama Department of Conservation and Natural Resources denies any such animal exists in the state. "There aren't any giant cats in Alabama," Dodd said. "Whatever. You didn't see it?" The Alabama Metal Man. The woman on the other end of the telephone call was frantic. Falkville, Alabama, Police Chief Jeff Greenhaw answered the telephone shortly before 10 p.m. the night of October 17, 1973, and heard the excited voice of a resident of rural Falkville claim a spaceship had landed just outside town in a field. The chief grabbed his camera and left the police station, arriving at the site of the landing at precisely 10 p.m. There was no ship in the field. There was, however, a monster. Greenhaw encountered a bipedal creature wrapped metal, and it advanced on him, according to an article written by B.J. Booth for NACAP. It looked like his head and neck were kind of made together, Greenhaw told reporters. He was real bright, something like rubbing mercury on nickel, but just as smooth as glass. When Greenhaw trained his police cruiser headlights on it, the creature bolted across the field. Greenhaw pushed the car to 35 miles per hour across the bumpy terrain, but the monster quickly outdistanced it. "He was running faster than any human I ever saw," Greenhaw reported. Although the metal monster was never seen again, neither was the ship. The entity could still be wandering northern Alabama. Exploring American Monsters, Colorado. Known for its Wild West history, and great skiing, Colorado also boasts a wealth of dinosaur fossils, is the birthplace of Frank Welker, the voice of Fred from Scooby-Doo, and a variety of geography, such as high plains, most of the southern Rocky Mountains, and desert. The perfect habitats for Bigfoot? Well, sure. Colorado has a long history of Bigfoot encounters, but exploring American monsters isn't about well-known cryptids like Bigfoot, it's about bizarre hidden monsters like the Slide Rock Boulter. Slide Rock Boulter. Miners and lumberjacks in the 1800s came out of the mountains with tales of a land whale that lived on the slopes, and fed off any animal that wandered in front of it, especially people. This huge creature would lurk at the tops of mountains, lying in wait for days, unmoving. It latched itself onto the mountainside with hooks on the end of its massive fluked tail. When prey approached, it would release the hooks, and slide down the slope, tearing through trees and boulders, before swallowing its dinner with its huge, saw-toothed mouth. One of the earliest accounts of the Slide Rock Boulter in print was in the 1910 book, Fearsome Creatures of the Lumberwoods, by William T. Cox. As the years went on, and Colorado became a vacation spot, the Slide Rock Boulter has been blamed for missing tourists it apparently loves to dine on. Vampires. In 2010, A woman drove her SUV into a canal in Mesa County, Colorado, and told authorities the wreck was caused by a vampire, according to the Denver Post. She drove on a dirt road near the town of Fruita on the western slope when she saw a vampire on the road. Terrified, the woman, not identified by police, put the SUV into reverse, and drove it off the road where it overturned. Authorities said she was not under the influence of drugs or alcohol. This isn't the first report of a vampire in Colorado. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, the mining town of Lafayette, east of Boulder, attracted workers from the eastern United States, as well as Europe. One of these workers was Fodor Glava from Transylvania, the Lafayette vampire. When Glava died in 1918, rumors started circulating that he was a vampire. When a tree sprouted from his grave on what would be the chest region of Glava, now 6 feet under, people were convinced the tree grew from a stake driven into his heart. Claudia Lund, curator of the Lafayette Miners Museum, told Colorado's News 9. A blood-red bush that grows next to the grave didn't help matters. Living dinosaurs. Myrtle Snow, of Pagosa Springs in north-central Colorado, in 1982 told Empire magazine that, as a child she'd seen living dinosaurs. In 1935, when she was 3, she saw 5 baby dinosaurs. After the dinosaurs attacked a local farmer's sheep, the farmer shot one, and she got a good look at it. My grandfather took us to see it the next morning, she told Empire. It was about 7 feet tall, was gray, had a head like a snake, short front legs with claws that resembled chicken feet, large stout back legs and a long tail. A fanciful tale? Maybe, if it was the only one. Over the years, residents of Pueblo, in southeastern Colorado, have claimed to see Tyrannosaurus rex-type dinosaurs running through the countryside. The creature, a small T-Rex at about 3 feet tall, has powerful hind legs, tiny front legs, and a long tail. We're going all over the states now. Exploring American Monsters, California. Humans have lived in California for at least 15,000 years. In 1848, the United States acquired the area that would one day become the state of California for $15 million after signing the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which ended the Mexican-American War. California, famous for Hollywood, the Golden Gate Bridge, and earthquakes, is the most populated state in the Union, and the third largest after Alaska and Texas. Outside the large cities, 37 million people in the greater Los Angeles area, lie great expanses of desert, mountains, including Vasquez Rocks Natural Area Park where Captain James Kirk battled the Gorn in Star Trek, and forests. Despite the number of people, there's plenty of room in California for monsters. As with the other pieces of this series, I'm leaving out the most famous monsters, in this case a naughty girl named Patty from Bluff Creek, California, and am instead focusing on the lesser-known monsters, like the Dark Watchers. The coastal Santa Lucia Mountains run for 105 miles from Monterey County to San Luis Obispo County. The western slopes of the mountains are covered with ponderosa pine, Santa Lucia fir, and coastal redwood. The mountains are also home to the Dark Watchers. You may remember a small anecdote about these Dark Watchers in the previous thread. The first peoples to speak of the Dark Watchers were the Chumash Indians, who once lived in the 200-mile stretch between Malibu, California, and Paso Robles. When European settlers first came to the region, they too saw these giant human silhouettes that stand on ridges, and seem to stare across the mountains. When watched themselves, the Dark Watchers fade from sight. Legend has it these humanoid creatures rarely appear to anyone who is carrying a gun, or is dressed in weatherproof clothing, only revealing themselves to people who wander the mountains in more old-fashioned garb. Nobel Prize-winning author and California native John Steinbeck wrote about the Dark Watchers in his short story, Flight, as did poet Robinson Jeffers in his poem Such Counsels You Gave to Me. Although people have seen the Dark Watchers looking across the Santa Lucia Mountains for hundreds of years, when approached these watchers vanish, leaving nothing behind, not even a footprint. The Billywhack Monster. A monster terrorized Santa Paula, California, during World War II and the years shortly after. The creature, tall and ape-like with horns like a ram, frequented the haunts around the Billywhack Dairy and Ranch off Wheeler Canyon Road. Claimed to be the result of an experiment by the government, the Billywhack Monster had long, gray hair, and was massively muscled. The beast was reported to throw large rocks at people, and pound on the hoods of witnesses' cars, leaving dents. The monster was allegedly the result of the government's attempts to make a super soldier in an area lab, but escaped. Although seen often throughout the 1950s and up until 1964, sightings of the Billywhack Monster have grown few and quite far between. The Black Demon. The prehistoric megalodon shark was as long as a bowling lane, as heavy as a Boeing 757, and was armed with 6-inch long, serrated, heart-shaped teeth designed to rip through bones and heavy cartilage. It was the largest predator to ever swim the seas, and did so from about 23.03 to 2.58 million years ago. Could the megalodon still swim our world's oceans? Some eyewitnesses believe so. A 31-foot-long shark, great whites can grow up to 17 feet, was seen off the coast of New Zealand in 2014, according to the New Zealand Herald. One that was huge, like dinosaur huge, was spotted off Fishhook Beach in Cape Town, South Africa, according to the Guardian newspaper. Naturalist David Stead reported seeing an immense shark in 1918, and in the 1960s, fishermen claim a shark longer than their 55-foot fishing boat circled the vessel before swimming off. Sailors off the coast of California have similar stories, but none is as persistent as the Black Demon from the Gulf of California just south of the border. This shark is said to be greater than 60 feet long. In 2008, a fisherman named Eric Mack said his boat was rocked by the Black Demon. Although he didn't see the entire beast, the tail fin rose 5 feet out of the water, according to Discovery News. Exploring American Monsters, Arkansas. The state of Arkansas in the southern U.S. is known for its lush green mountains, roaring rivers, and University of Arkansas football. It's the headquarters of the world's #1 retailer, Walmart, and is the birthplace of musician Johnny Cash, and former U.S. President Bill Clinton. It's also the home of monsters. The most famous of these is the Fouke Monster, a Sasquatch-type creature immortalized in the 1972 movie The Legend of Boggy Creek. But this series, Exploring American Monsters, isn't about well-known beasts, it's about the lesser-known creatures the world sees from the corner of its eye, like the Ozark Howler. Ozark Howler. The Ozark Mountains in north-central Arkansas are covered in pine trees, hickory, and several species of oak. A number of endangered species live in these forests, and so does the Ozark Howler. The howler has been reported to be a great cat, or dog, or bear-like beast with eyes that glow red from behind a black pelt. The monster stands 4 feet tall at the shoulder, and some witnesses say the beast has horns. But the one aspect every witness agrees upon is the Ozark Howler's piercing, terrifying cry, described as everything from the bugling of a bull elk, to the laughter of a hyena. More on that later. Many people have dismissed the Ozark Howler as a hoax, a college student's idea of a joke, but howler sightings stretch back to the early 1800s. A number of residents of Red Oak, Arkansas, reported seeing the howler in 1846, as well as those in nearby Branson, Missouri, in 1998, and in Jasper, Arkansas, in 2011. Is the howler a hoax? Witnesses don't think so. Gauro. This 20-foot-long lizard with jutting tusks reportedly lurks in dark, dank caverns in northern Arkansas. The earliest report of the Gauro was in the January 31, 1897 edition of the Arkansas Gazette, detailing a man's claim of killing one of the monsters near Marshall, Arkansas, and sending the remains to the Smithsonian Institution, although there are no records of it. The man, William Miller of Little Rock, gathered a group of hunters to track down the beast that had been feasting off local livestock. They tracked the Gauro to its lair where it charged them, shaking the ground, and felling trees before they shot it to death. Other reports of Gauro encounters scatter northern Arkansas. Hyenas. The hyena of North America, Chasmoporthetes, lived during the Plioclystocene era, 4.9 million to 780,000 years ago. It was lean-limbed, and sprinted like a cheetah. Have a smattering of American hyenas survived until this modern age? Some residents of Arkansas think so. According to a post at Arkansas Hunting.net, a hunter in Izard County claims a man saw a hyena cross the road in front of him. He didn't believe the man until others came forward reporting to have seen the same animal. Similar stories are posted on thetopics.com. A woman says she was scouting deer with her ex-husband years ago on Lost Mountain in northern Arkansas, when they saw a strange animal with a band of coyotes. Running with this pack, I noticed an animal that wasn't anything like them, the woman wrote. It had a large hump on its back, legs were sorta low to the ground, and the color was way off. I'd seen them on Discovery Channel enough to know what it was, so I started freaking out screaming, "Oh my God, it's an honest-to-God hyena." White River Monster. Named Whitey for its home in the White River, this gray-skinned river monster first appeared in 1915. A local plantation owner who saw Whitey in 1937 said it looked about 5 feet wide, 12 feet long, and had the face of a catfish. The White River, that's flood stage is 26 feet, doesn't seem deep enough to be the home of a monster that large. But reports of Whitey continue. Witnesses saw a 20-foot-long gray monster with a horn and spiny back in the river in 1971. Investigators discovered 14-inch, three-toed tracks of a large animal that apparently emerged from the river, and walked on the shore, crushing brush and breaking small trees. Hundreds of people have claimed to see Whitey over the years. Since 1973, Whitey has been protected by law. Pterosaur. According to science, these flying reptiles lived from the late Triassic period to the end of the Cretaceous period, which would make the creature extinct for at least 66 million years. However, people have reported seeing these winged monsters all over the world, including Arkansas. A group of people saw a large flying creature near Texarkana, Arkansas, in 1982 that was featherless, had a pointed beak, and a head crest. When they got home they looked up the monster in a book. It was a pterosaur. According to the Christian County Headliner News, a woman named Laura Dean was driving to the grocery store when a large creature with gray, leathery skin, and a head crest appeared from beneath a bridge and flew within 6 feet of her car. The wings were bat-like with claws at the tips, and the tail was tipped with a diamond-shaped flap. What terrified her was the size of the beast. It was larger than the Chevrolet S10 pickup she drove. Exploring American Monsters, Arizona. The last of the contiguous states to join the Union, Valentine's Day 1912, Arizona is known for its deserts, high heat, and the mile-deep Grand Canyon, one of the 7 wonders of the natural world. But Arizona isn't just desert and canyons. The northern part of the state is filled with mountains, ski resorts, forests, and monsters. Mogollon Monster. The Mogollon Rim is an almost 2,000-foot escarpment that runs through the central part of Arizona. Covered in ponderosa pine forests, it's the perfect hiding place for the Mogollon Monster. First reported in the Arizona Republican in 1903, I.W. Stevens encountered the bipedal Mogollon Monster close to the Grand Canyon. It was drinking the blood of mountain lions. This human-looking creature with long white hair and beard that reached to his knees, sported 2-inch claws on its fingers. When the monster noticed Stevens, it threatened him with a club. Throughout the years the Mogollon Monster has been described as black, gray, or white, square-headed or round, but all reports are of a tall hair-covered being on 2 legs with a human-like hairless face. Although many people have equated the monster to Bigfoot, one hiker claims the monster is a troll. When hiking the Mogollon Rim Canyon Point Sinkhole Trail, the hiker saw the creature on its knees drinking water from a pool making noises like a pig. The troll had long bluish-gray hair, and a human-like face full of bumps. When it saw her, The troll stood on two legs, and ran away. This sounds much more like the club-wielding bloodsucker from 1903 than a Bigfoot. Dragons. Farther south is Tombstone, an 1800s boomtown that was the location of the famous gunfight at the OK Corral between the Clanton Gang and the lawmen, Wyatt, Virgil, and Morgan Earp, and Doc Holliday. Tombstone was also once known for a dragon. According to Mysteries and Miracles of Arizona, by Jack Cutts, two cowboys rode into Tombstone on June 7, 1890 with the skin of what they claimed to be a giant flying lizard they'd killed outside town. The cowboys chased the beast on horseback before shooting and killing it. The dragon measured 92 feet long with an 80-foot wingspan, an 8-foot long head, and eyes the size of dinner plates, the cowboys claimed. The battle was captured in the April 26, 1890 Tombstone Epitaph newspaper. Werewolves, in various forms, have existed in many cultures across the world. From the medieval European werewolf that dominates horror movies, to American Indian skinwalkers, the image of a man changing into a beast has terrified people for centuries. But, sitting safely in a cozy house, watching television, the werewolf stalking the night is nothing but legend. For a group of teenagers in Tempe, Arizona, that idea is dead wrong. From a 2009 interview. The glow of city lights bathed the Arizona night in gray as four teenagers walked onto the Shalimar golf course in Tempe. Carl Davis, now an adult, was in high school when he and his friends, bored with their weekly Bible study meeting, walked outside, and onto the course. My girlfriend says something like, "Hey, something just jumped out of that palm tree," Davis said. The trees were approximately 35 feet tall, so the other teens laughed and resumed their conversation. A few seconds later she lets out a blood-curdling scream, just pure shock terror, Davis said. As Davis turned toward his girlfriend, he saw something he couldn't believe. "I look in the direction and there's a creature lumbering along the wall towards us," Davis said. "It was as tall as me, 6 foot, hunched over, huge snout like a werewolf. The beast, blacker than the night surrounding it, lunged toward the teens and they ran. It was chasing after us," Davis said. "It was running along the wall toward me and I just turned and ran, I didn't think to look back." The teens never saw the thing again, although something about the encounter still confuses Davis. "It was in the middle of town," he said. "That's what always gets me about that thing. Not out in the woods or at a secluded cabin, but in Tempe, Arizona. Giants. Gigantic human remains, sometimes with red hair, have been reported across America, many of them in the desert Southwest. A giant human skull was once found in a cliff dwelling south of Winslow, Arizona, according to The Complete Guide to Mysterious Beings, by the great paranormal investigator John Keel. It was so big that a size 7 Stetson was placed on it and looked like one of those tiny hats merrymakers wear on New Year's. The skull also had a gold tooth. Workers reportedly discovered a huge stone coffin in Fort Crittenden, Arizona, in 1891. The coffin held a skeleton that measured 12 feet tall, and had 12 toes. A man named Samuel Hubbard is said to have found the mummified bodies of two giant humans, 15 to 18 feet tall, in a cave in the Grand Canyon in 1923. This is 14 years after the Phoenix Gazette published the account of explorer G.E. Kincaid, who said he discovered a cave in the canyon filled with Egyptian artifacts, including mummies. Probably the last one I will post for tonight. Hope everyone is enjoying all of this spoopy stuff. Exploring American Monsters, Alaska. Alaska is big. At 663,300 square miles, it's about the size of Germany, Poland, and France. To put its size into perspective, if Alaska were a sovereign nation, it would be the 18th largest country on the planet. This picturesque state is filled with scenic, if not cold, ocean views, thick forests, the highest mountains in the United States, 100,000 glaciers, and abundant wildlife, but with a population of 737,259, about the size of Detroit, Michigan, half being in the Anchorage metropolitan area. The one thing it's not filled with is people, just 1.2 per square mile. Alaska also has 6,640 miles of coastline, which is greater than all the other states combined. That's a lot of open area for bear, moose, and killer whales, but it's also a haven for monsters. Living mammoths. From the Pliocene era, 5 million years ago, to the early Holocene, 11,700 BC until now, various species of mammoth lumbered across North America, Europe, Asia, and Africa. Although science agrees the species went extinct about 10,000 years ago, one pocket of woolly mammoth was still alive on Russia's Rigel Island until 1650 BC. The pyramids at Giza were already 1,000 years old at that point. Chew on that for a while. I hadn't posted those specific stories in any of my threads before, but I was aware of them from other threads I had seen, regarding the same creature. I figured it belonged here with the rest. However, a smattering of reports claims the 11 feet tall, 6-ton animals have lived into modern times. Footage in Russia shot by a Nazi photographer during WW2 apparently shows a woolly mammoth walking through the snow. American Indians in Canada have stories of these tusked beasts living in the northern wilderness. There's also this case published in the November 28, 1896 edition of the Portland, Maine, Press of Colonel C. F. Fowler, who heard of woolly mammoths in Alaska. According to the article, Fowler was in Alaska to purchase ancient mammoth ivory from the local Inuit Indians when he noticed blood and rotting flesh on the roots of some tusks. When Fowler asked an elder where the tribe got the tusks, the elder told him, less than 3 months before a party of his young men had encountered a drove of monsters about 50 miles above where he was then encamped, and had succeeded in killing 2, Fowler wrote. When Fowler spoke with the hunting party, they described a creature from another age. Their ears were suddenly saluted by a chorus of loud, shrill, trumpet-like calls, and an enormous creature came crashing toward them through the thicket, the ground fairly trembling beneath its ponderous footfalls, Fowler wrote. They were armed with large-caliber muskets and stood their ground, opening fire on the mammoth. A bullet must have penetrated the creature's brain, for it staggered forward and fell dead. In the article, Fowler also said Alfred P. Swineford, second governor of Alaska, claimed there were large herds of these monsters above Snake River and Alaska's Seward Peninsula. If these giants of the past are still live, Alaska would be the place. Nice weather for it? Iliamna Lake Monster. In a sparsely populated area of southwest Alaska, the number of residents in the entire region was 109 in 2010, lies the 1,012 square mile Iliamna Lake, home to Chinook salmon, lake trout, northern pike, and illy, the Iliamna Lake Monster. The lake itself, 77 miles long, 22 miles wide, and 988 feet deep, is the largest lake in Alaska, and capable of hiding the 30-foot-long, square-headed beast. The monster, known as Ganakadet by the native Tlingit Indians, was viewed as a god having the body of an orca, and the head of a wolf, and was known to eat fishing boats. Early Russian explorers reportedly saw the creature at Iliamna Lake, and sightings have continued to this day. Modern reports come from explorers and biologists who have seen the 30-foot monster, sometimes described as aluminium-colored, other times as black with a white stripe. One report has an airplane snagging the beast with a tuna hook. The monster towed the plane around a lake before those aboard could release the cable. Experts have claimed the Iliamna Lake Monster is everything from a white sturgeon, to a sleeper shark, to a beluga whale, all of which can reach a length of about 20 feet and have access to the lake, but the locals know better. Iliamna Lake is home to a monster. Kodiak dinosaur. Kodiak Island lies just 176 miles from Iliamna Lake and is the scene of another sighting of a water monster. The shrimp boat Mylark, equipped with state-of-the-art sonar equipment, spotted something in the waters off Kodiak the people aboard could only describe as a dinosaur. The boat coasted past the island in 1969 attempting to map the seafloor when the equipment detected an object swimming about 330 feet below the Mylark, The object was 200 feet long. The largest living sea creature, the blue whale, only reaches 100 feet in length, and doesn't fit the description of what the crew of the Mylark saw that day, a creature with a long, thin neck topped with a small square head, 2 pairs of flippers, and a long, slender tail. The crew thought they'd seen a dinosaur. Giant birds. In 2002, scores of Alaskans told the Anchorage Daily News they'd seen gigantic birds overhead. Villagers from Togiak and Monokotuk in southwestern Alaska reported seeing the bird, which was much bigger than anything they have seen before. Moses Kuchiak, 43, worked on his tractor when he saw the bird, and couldn't believe it. "At first I thought it was one of those old-time otter planes," he said. "Instead of continuing toward me, it banked to the left, and that's when I noticed it wasn't a plane." A pilot and owner of Bristol Bay Air Service, John Booker, were skeptical of the reports of giant birds until he saw one himself. While flying near Monokotuk, he looked out his window and, "There's this big bird," he told the Daily News. "He's really, really big. You wouldn't want to have your children out." Raptor specialist Phil Skemp said there's nothing the size of that bird alive anymore. "I'm certainly not aware of anything with a 14-foot wingspan that's been alive for the last 100,000 years, he said. "That we know of. Here is something funny, were otter. The Kush-Dakat, or land otter people, of southeastern Alaska have terrorized the Tlingit peoples for centuries. Like the Gonakot, it wasn't enough to worry about. The Kush-Dakat are a race of people who can shapeshift into otters, but not before ensnaring humans in a web of cuteness. Otters are adorable, and turning the humans into Kush-Dakat themselves. Kush-Dakat often assume the form of a human's loved ones to ease the deception. Once a human becomes a Kush-Dakat, his position in the afterlife is forfeit, the soul is trapped upon earth. But the Kush-Dakat are a finicky folk, prone to Kush-Dakat transformation one minute, acts of kindness the next, such as rescuing drowning sailors, or simply shredding a victim's flesh, and spilling his entrails. You know, just because. The Tlingit kept dogs to protect against the Kush-Dakat. Not only could the dogs identify a Kush-Dakat, because of their nature, or the fact that Kush-Dakat may be carrying pot is uncertain, but the land otter people are afraid of dogs. They're also apparently afraid of copper, fire, and urine. Yep, were otters are afraid of urine. Be safe out there, and keep a full bladder. I guess a few more posts won't hurt. Space Review, the MIB are back. Back in the early 1950s, a new aspect was added to the growing UFO phenomenon, the Men in Black. Yes, there were one or two pre-1950s MIB encounters, such as the saga of the sinister character that terrorized a certain Harold Dahl, one of the key figures in the notorious UFO event at Maury Island in June 1947. But, overall, it was the 1950s that saw the rise of the MIB. We pretty much have one person to thank for that rise. His name was Albert Bender. From his home in Bridgeport, Connecticut, Bender created the International Flying Saucer Bureau, and went on to publish a newsletter/journal called Space Review. It was filled with information on then recent UFO encounters, letters from fellow researchers, and much more of a flying saucer nature. And then, quite suddenly, there was no more Space Review, and there was no more Albert Bender, either. At least, not in ufology. Bender alluded to having been silenced because of his UFO studies, and, as a result, he dropped out of ufology, shut down the IFSB, and brought Space Review to a close. In 1956, Gray Barker wrote a book titled They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers, which told the story of Bender's entry into ufology, and of his mysterious exit from the subject, too. In Barker's book, Bender's decision to quit UFO research is due to threats issued by the Men in Black, who come across like agents of some highly classified government agency. Now let's take a jump forward to the early 1960s, that's when Albert Bender wrote his own book on his alleged experiences with the MIB. Its title was Flying Saucers and the Three Men. The Three Men being the black-garbed band that terrified Bender into silence. In Bender's own account, the MIB were nothing like the MIB of the type that Barker wrote of, or of the kind portrayed by Tommy Lee Jones and Will Smith in the MIB movies. Bender's MIB were pale-faced, ghoulish things that looked like a combination of 1950s-era mobsters and reanimated corpses. They manifested, as in literally, in his attic bedroom amid a foul odor of brimstone, and had bright shining eyes. In fact, they were far more like the clearly supernatural Hat Man, of Heidi Hollis' book of the same name, that attracts so much attention today. So, by now you may be wondering, why am I bringing up the matter of Albert Bender and the MIB, an affair that dates back more than 60 years? Well, I'll tell you. Albert Bender's Space Review journals have just been published as a new, packaged edition. I have copies of some of the originals, but, if you don't have them, and you're fascinated by the MIB mystery, this is something you won't want to miss, mainly because the journals provide deep insight into what was going on in Bender's life and work prior to the MIB visits, and also at the height of them, even though Bender was very cautious about what he said of the MIB in Space Review. The bound edition of Bender's Space Review publications is published by New Sauce Ryan Press, who say the following: this rare anthology was originally published in conjunction with Bender's first book, Flying Saucers and the Three Men, which was beset by various jinxes, men in black attacks, missing manuscripts, psychic disturbances, and other unusual delays. Until now, these issues of Space Review were only available to members. For the first time ever, they are being made available for the general public to enjoy. Inside, one finds interesting details that may lead to some understanding of what exactly happened to Bender, who became a media star after announcing he had been taken to a bisexual planet, Kashyyyk. According to Bender, the denizens of Kashyyyk had not only surrounded Earth with an array of orbiting spacecraft, but had also buried motherships in remote regions like Antarctica, in an effort to extract a key substance from our seawater. Bender's colorful descriptions of the people of Kashyyyk, having received wide attention in the early days of ufology, influenced a generation of saucer enthusiasts, who put the stories into mass circulation. As a result, many elements of Bender's fantastical tale can still be found today, in programs like Futurama, The Matrix, X-Files, and countless others. For MIB enthusiasts, or those who want to learn more about the MIB and how the phenomenon really kicked off in the early 1950s, Space Review is required reading. Indeed, it is worth reading, and with that I will leave you now and continue my search for more interesting TID bits of strange info for my fellow X-Files. Okay, maybe I am not totally done with Lakuchi humanoid. MUFON CMS report, April 2, 2015, with Lakuchi State Forest along State Route 471. Incident occurred at SR 471 and narrow dirt logging road east of roadway approximately 5.9 miles south of Florida intersection of State Route 50 and State Route 471, Terrytown, Florida. Meteorological and terrain: moon illumination good, casting visible shadows on standing objects, low ground mist observed in area, but not at incident site. Entity in protective suit to include helmet observed operating equipment/scanner. Narrative: observer is a commercial driver operating an 18-wheeler north on SR 471 at a rate of approximately 60 miles per hour. Dim light flashes on east side of roadway caught driver's attention and observed an individual at an entrance of logging trail, approximately 3 meters from edge of roadway in the center of the trail. Individual was wearing a containment suit. Suit was off-white in color. Individual was between 1.5 and 1.8 meters tall. Individual was operating a device which was held in front at midsection level. Device emitted rapid bursts of light in a clockwise circular direction downward and coned out in an 30-degree angle. An unknown substance or organic material in the air reacted to the light pulses, with brilliant small star bursts of white light. Light bursts illuminated the individual's presence and illuminated his suit details. Suit details: Individual's footwear was a different material and color of the suit, darker brown in color. Individual had a harness system that extended over the shoulders and ended at midsection. Harness system supported a pentagon-shaped box on the individual's chest. White in color, with gold or darker brown geometric symbols on the front. Individual was wearing a large oval-shaped helmet with reflected light from the device and headlight of the vehicle. Total time of encounter, 8 seconds. Closest distance to entity, 5 meters. Driver continued making observations until Terrytown. GPS, CB, and radio were off at time of incident and vehicle instrumentation and operation functioned normally. No indication of EMR. End of report. Weird Florida, your travel guide to Florida's local legends and best kept secrets. Pasco County, Florida, including its history, the Charles B. Anderson House, the Zephyrhills Downtown Historic District, the Withlacoochee State Trail, and more. Florida Authentica, your field guide to the unique, eccentric, and natural marvels of the real Sunshine State. The Cryptoterrestrials, a meditation on indigenous humanoids and the aliens among us. And you thought I left? I just couldn't sleep tonight without posting one more thing, K. Albert Bender's Woman in Black. Albert Bender, author of the 1962 book, Flying Saucers and the Three Men, is inextricably linked to the enigma of the Men in Black. For that reason alone, it's baffling that practically every researcher and author that has ever commented on Bender's encounters with the dark-suited ones, has overlooked something massively important, his family's links to a woman in black. In 1933, while he just a child, Bender's mother told him the chilling story of a family ghost, a definitive WIB. The story revolved around a second cousin of Bender who, while only 6 years of age, moved into a creepy old house with his family. It was a house that sat adjacent to an old, abandoned mine shaft. The mine was a downright eerie place, it was filled with angular shadows. Old wooden supports creaked and groaned endlessly, and a multitude of bats and rats called it their home. It was also a mine in which, years earlier, a despondent young woman slit her throat and, as the blood cascaded forth, threw herself into the depths of one of the darkened, old shafts. Her battered and torn body was finally recovered and was taken into the house in which Bender's cousin lived, before being buried in the local graveyard. The woman, noted Bender, was said to have been a definitive witch, one that lived alone with a great many cats, and she was said to prowl about only at night. Bender added that, my cousin wore a coin on an unbroken chain around his neck constantly, even to bed. After having lived in the house a few months, his parents noticed his health was failing. He would not eat, and claimed he saw a lady in black in his bedroom at night. Of course they thought it all nonsense and that he was only dreaming, but soon they began to have sleepless nights when the boy would scream out in his sleep and they would find it necessary to go and comfort him. In the early hours of one particularly fraught morning, Bender's cousin awoke the family, wailing like a veritable banshee. His parents noticed that the coin had been unhooked from the chain and was positioned on the pillow. According to Bender, the boy told his mother and father that the lady in black was trying to choke him and take his coin away from him. The local doctor said the whole thing was down to nightmares and nothing else. Very soon thereafter, the doctor would be proven catastrophically wrong. With no end in sight to the night terrors, both parents elected to sleep in the boy's room until things calmed down. On the fourth night, they were woken up by the menacing and horrific sight of a hooded, female form, dressed in black, and with anemic-looking skin, that slowly glided across the room, right in the direction of the boy. A bony hand moved slowly down to grasp the coin, at which point the boy's father lit a candle and firmly thrust it in the face of the wib. Bender said, they could see a pale, chalky white face staring at them. In an instant the terrifying hag was gone, and so was the coin. Not surprisingly, the family vacated the house within a week. The boy, to the relief of everyone, quickly recovered. This is just the mere tip of the iceberg. Indeed, There is more to come on the Bender family/Wib connection, much more, in fact. And, it will all be revealed in my forthcoming book, Women in Black. The saga gets even stranger. The unsolved mystery of the Van Meter visitor. A bizarre legend and unsolved mystery which has haunted a small Iowa town for more than 100 years is the subject of a new book called The Van Meter Visitor, a true and mysterious encounter with the unknown. For several nights in 1903, the small town of Van Meter, Iowa was terrorized by a giant bat-like creature that emerged from an old abandoned mine. The identity of this mysterious monster has never been discovered, but over 100 years later a new book is retelling the amazing tale and hoping to shed some light on what happened all those years ago. The legend dates back to the fall of 1903, when several of Van Meter's most well-respected citizens reported a half-human, half-animal with enormous, smooth bat wings flying about. The creature is described as moving at speeds the townsfolk had never witnessed before, plus it let off a powerful stench and shot a blinding light from its horned head. Each time the townsfolk encountered the creature they fired their guns at it, but this appeared to have no impact on the creature. On the first night it was first spotted flying across the building tops. The next evening it was spotted by both the town doctor and bank cashier Peter Dunn, who took a plaster cast of its great three-toed tracks. On the third night, a man spotted it perched atop a telephone pole. Another resident who saw it described the monster as hopping like a kangaroo, while the local high school teacher likened it to a devil. Scared and angered by what they had witnessed, the townsfolk followed the creature to an abandoned coal mine near an old brickyard where they heard a noise from the mine. Presently the noise opened up again, as though Satan and a regiment of imps were coming forth for battle, reads an article in the Des Moines Daily News from October 3, 1903. The monster appeared together with a smaller version. In a flash of bright light they sailed away, but returned in the morning when the townsmen had gathered with weapons to rid the earth of them. The reception they received would have sunk the Spanish fleet, but aside from unearthly noise and peculiar odor they did not seem to mind it, but slowly descended the shaft of the old mine. The creature was never seen again. This amazing tale has survived and been retold for several generations now, and a written version even exists in the town's centennial book. The new book is the work of Chad Lewis, who has written over 15 books about the supernatural, plus co-authors Noah Voss and Kevin Lee Nelson, and help from local librarian Jalina Walker. The authors visited the quiet town and spoke to local residents who told them the stories about the creature which passed Ben down, and they visited several historic locations including the mine. Lewis says he has found no evidence to suggest the monster was a hoax, although he believes the facts of the story may have been embellished over the years. Lewis told the Des Moines Register that even though he said he's unsure what happened those fall nights in 1903 in Van Meter, seeking the answer was more important than finding it. It was an era when anything was possible. Science was starting to gain momentum. In fact, they had just discovered the mountain gorilla. So the beast in the jungle was real, he told. People were open to the fact that anything could happen. The Van Meter Visitor, a true and mysterious encounter with the unknown. Blurring the boundaries, explorations to the fringes of nonfiction. Live pterosaurs in America, not extinct, flying creatures of cryptozoology that some call pterodactyls, or flying dinosaurs or prehistoric birds. This monster like a maniac's dream. The World, New York, New York, October 5, 1903. Awful winged form shedding dazzling light terrifies an Iowa town. Des Moines, IA, October 4. The town of Van Meter, containing 1,000 persons, is terribly wrought up by what is described as a horrible monster. Every man, woman, and child in the town is in a state of terror, and fully half of them fail to close their eyes in slumber except in broad daylight. Friday night, while the population was keeping the dreadful vigil, every electric light in the city was kept burning to satisfy the most timid. The monster put in its appearance Monday night. U.G. Griffith, an implement dealer, drove into town at 1 a.m. and saw what seemed to be an electric searchlight on Marr and Griggs' store. While he gazed, it sailed across to another building and then disappeared. His story was not believed the next day. But the following night Dr. A.C. Alcott, who sleeps in his office on the principal street, was awakened by a bright light shining in his face. He grabbed a shotgun and ran outside the building where he saw a monster, seemingly half human and half beast, with great bat-like wings. A dazzling light that fairly blinded him came from a blunt, horn-like protuberance in the middle of the animal's forehead, and gave off a stupefying odor that almost overcame him. The doctor discharged his weapon and fled into his office, barring doors and windows, and remained there in abject terror until morning. Peter Dunn, cashier of the only bank in the town, fearing bank robbers, loaded a repeating shotgun, with shells filled with buckshot, and prepared to guard his funds next night. At 2 o'clock he was blinded by the presence of a light of great intensity. Eventually he recovered his senses sufficiently to distinguish the monster through the window. The plate glass and sash were torn out and the monster disappeared. Next morning imprints of great three-toed feet were discernible in the soft earth. Plaster casts of them were taken. That night Dr. O.W. White saw the monster climbing down a telephone pole, with a beak much in the manner of a parrot. As it struck the ground it seemed to travel in leaps, like a kangaroo, using its huge, featherless wings to assist. It gave off no light. He fired at it, and believes he wounded it. The shot was followed by an overpowering odor. Sidney Gregg, attracted by the shot, saw the monster flying away. But the climax came Friday night. The whole town was aroused by this time. Professor Martin, principal of the schools, decided that upon the description that it was an antediluvian animal. Shortly after midnight, J.L. Platt, foreman of the brick plant, heard a peculiar sound in an abandoned coal mine, and as the men had reported a similar sound before, a body of volunteers started an investigation. Presently the monster emerged from the shaft, accompanied by a smaller one. A score of shots were fired without effect. The whole town was aroused and vigil was maintained the rest of the night, but without result, until just at dawn, when the two monsters returned and disappeared down the shaft. Des Moines, Iowa, New York World. The Phu Quoc, Vietnam UFO crash. What was it? What was the UFO that crashed near Phu Quoc Island, Vietnam, in May 2008? The Russians contended was a U.S. military aircraft, State Route 91 Aurora, that was shot out of the sky. Cambodia made an early announcement that it was an unidentified plane that had exploded but soon retracted the statement. Soldiers from Vietnam, Cambodia, and Thailand searched and found metal that could not be identified to any known aircraft. As well, the Vietnamese released video and images of the wreckage, which had strange, unknown symbols or characters embossed on it. So, what was the Phu Quoc UFO? After a UFO allegedly exploded above Phu Quoc Island off the coast of Vietnam, metal debris was recovered that suggests the object may have been built by extraterrestrials. According to officials at the state-run Vietnam News Agency, an unidentified flying object exploded at about 10 a.m. on May 27 over the northern part of Phu Quoc Island. Colonel Nguyen Van Ky, a military commander on the island, was the source of the report, and no civilian, commercial, or military aircraft are said to be missing in that area of southern Vietnam or nearby Cambodia. The object that crashed was first seen in the skies over Cambodia, where officials said it appeared as a fire in the sky. The thing exploded shortly after that, and what was left of it crashed on Phu Quoc Island. Citizens of a commune on the island retrieved a piece of metal from the crash that they described as measuring 1 meter by about 60 centimeters. The metal is unusual looking and appears to have symbols engraved or stamped into it. Additional pieces of metal were recovered by members of the military and civilians. At this writing, there are 14 pieces in possession of the military command of Phu Quoc district. The metal debris rained down in Gan Dau and Quoc Hin communes on Phu Quoc at about 10:20 a.m. on May 27, 2008, according to Lam Quang Chan, a spokesperson for the Provincial People's Committee. While it's entirely possible that the sightings and recovered material may have nothing to do with an alien spacecraft, The events surrounding this crash are similar to other incidents involving UFOs. For example, some of the symbols that appear to be engraved or stamped into the metal, if they are genuine, are similar to those described by witnesses on the thing that crashed near Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, in the 1960s. An I-beam from the Roswell UFO crash in 1947 was also reported to have unknown symbols on it. Phu Quoc Island is a popular tourist destination located in the Gulf of Thailand. It has 13 resort areas and several urban centers. The island was once considered a backwater area known primarily for the production of anchovy sauce and black pepper. Once a French territory with rubber and coconut plantations, Phu Quoc Island housed a prisoner of war camp during the Vietnam War. Vietnam and Cambodia struggled over possession of the island for years after the war until it finally became a part of Vietnam in 1975. UFO crashes are rare events. When they occur in an area of the world that may not be under the control of the usual cover-up suspects, an opportunity presents itself for the nation and people involved to share what has happened with the world. Vietnam is a communist country with close ties to China, so there still may be a tight lid clamped on this event at some point. If that doesn't occur, we may have a chance to see the smoking gun that proves intelligent alien life forms exist and are visiting the Earth. Now I'd like to share a Swedish entity with you. Keep in mind that alien encounters in Sweden are very rare, usually people only see UFOs. In the early 1970s a mysterious little being scared the bejesus out of people when it stood next to roads and shone a very bright light as they drove past it, or simply acting inhuman. He was spotted both in northern Sweden and western Finland, and came to be known as Lillmannen, the Little Man. August 15, 1970, Asser Sandberg, Olof Molander and his wife is driving on their way to Jokkfall when the three of them spot a small, weird human stand on the side of the road in the rain. As they spot him a loud bang is heard and a bright white light engulfs the car and the car radio starts to make static noises. After the encounter Asser develops eye problems and goes to a doctor, where he learns that his retina had been damaged on his right eye. February 2, 1971, Sinikka Kuitinen is heading to Uleåborg with her friend. As they're driving, a bright object appears on the right side of their car. It moves across the road, but doesn't vanish until they drive out on an open field. Suddenly they spot a small being, which they first thought was a small child, at the side of the road. It's wearing a helmet and a brown-green suit. It quickly jumps away and disappears. February 16, 1971. Ake Westerberg is waiting for the bus when he spots a being a bit farther down the road. Living in a small village, he calls out a couple of names since he thought it was a friend of his. Getting no answers, he starts to walk towards it. It's a small man, dressed in some kind of cloak with a box either hanging on his belly or that he's holding. When he's about 20 meters away from it, a white bright blinding light starts streaming out of a box on its belly. Ake turns away, blinded, and when he opens his eyes he can see how the road is illuminated a good 500 meters by this light. His eyes hurts, so he stands, terrified, in the silence until the light gradually goes away. When the bus arrives, he tries to look for any tracks using the bus's headlights, but finds nothing. The same night Ake wakes up with excruciating pain and couldn't move his body. Skeptics were delighted when Tord Engström told UFO Sweden about his friend Askim Sandberg. Askim was very short, fat, and used to wear a hat with earmuffs. According to Tord, Askim was the little man. The mysterious light was fire as Askim stole scrap and burned cables to get the copper wire within. He didn't confess to being the little man since stealing scrap was illegal. However, one still has to wonder, if Askim was the little man, why did he stand next to roads if he were doing something illegal? And why didn't anyone find buried remains of scrap after encountering the little man? And would a fire explain the very bright and blinding light, which also was described to turn on and off like with a switch of a button? One thing's for sure, whoever saw the little man is gonna remember it for the rest of their lives. Late one evening in January 1931, 24-years-old farmhand Helge Eriksson had an experience that he would never forget. He worked on a farmstead called Dannebo, not far from Eslöv, in the Swedish province of Skåne. It is a clear and beautiful winter evening when he decides to visit a friend on a farm nearby. They meet for a couple of hours and then Helge starts his way home around 10 p.m. Not far from Dannebo he is confronted by a very unusual sight. In 1973 my AFU colleague, Anders Liljegren, did a telephone interview with Helge and received the following narrative. I was close to the farmhouse where I worked when I noticed 10 to 12 very small men approaching. They were at a distance of around 50 meters when I discovered them and they came in my direction at a fast pace. They were so small, they reached only to my knees, and I remember this strange sight frightened me. The men pass by Helge only a few meters away and in the bright moonlight he gets a good view of their appearance and dress. The small entities are wearing dark green clothes with caps. To Helge their dress appear to be made in one piece. All the men wear a beard but their heads are unusually large compared to their bodies. Facial expression is hard and cruel. From the group comes a strong smell which was felt a long time afterwards. The men seem to be conscious of Helge's presence but they take no notice of him passing by, walking in an almost military fashion on the frozen ground. The sound of their footsteps is clearly heard and the troop continue out on a nearby field. Looking out on the field Helge observes a strange, blue-violet light, hidden in some sort of fog. The light is so intense that he has never seen anything like it. Suddenly there is a whining sound in the air and the whole sight is gone. Me personally I find it very interesting how alien encounters share many similarities between older myths like trolls and fairies, possibly the same things. Dr. Tom Benton, the Phantom of Mount Moosilauke. For 200 years, hikers on New Hampshire's Mount Moosilauke have been seeing a caped figure wandering the woods. Who is this mysterious mountain man? New England has a tradition of strange and frightening legends that are passed down orally from generation to generation. One such legend is the story of Dr. Tom Benton, a physician born in the 18th century, who is reported to still wander the woods of Mount Moosilauke. The story has changed slightly over the centuries, but some facts remain the same. Something sinister, something unexplained still lurks somewhere on the slopes of Mount Moosilauke. Tom Benton's early life. The Benton family settled in the town of Coventry, New Hampshire, now called Benton, New Hampshire, in the late 18th century. The son, Tom Benton, was something of a prodigy and he attracted the notice of a judge from Plymouth, New Hampshire. The judge wanted to offer a better educational opportunity to the youth, so he convinced Benton's parents to allow him to live with the judge. Once again, Benton proved to be a remarkable student. After graduation, Benton decided that he wanted to study medicine. The best school for medicine at that time was in Heidelberg, Germany, and Benton's intention was to study and return to New Hampshire to practice in his hometown. Once Benton learned the German language, he again surpassed his fellow students and was at the top of his class. He became friends with a teacher by the name of Professor Stockmeyer, who was something of an outcast among his fellow teachers. Apparently, the academic had been conducting some rather disturbing research. Professor Stockmeyer was desperately seeking the secret to eternal life. Tom Benton spent countless hours with Stockmeyer, and when the professor died, he left Benton some money, books, and an old, locked trunk. Tom Benton returns to New Hampshire. After Benton finished his medical studies, he did indeed return to New Hampshire. He had left his town as a precocious youngster and returned as a highly skilled, very successful physician. The physician quickly earned the respect and admiration of his patients, and everything seemed to be working in his favor. In 1816, something occurred and the event would alter Dr. Benton's life. No one knew exactly what happened, but there were two main theories. One theory was that Dr. Benton had a fiancée who died of typhoid fever. The other theory holds that she jilted him. Whatever the case, soon after, Dr. Benton began to exhibit strange behavior. He lost interest in his patients, his appearance became disheveled, and he began to withdraw from society. Eventually, he moved into an old house on the slopes of Mount Moosilauke and became a hermit. Tom Benton's quest for eternal life. The one thing that Dr. Benton took to his new home on the mountain was Professor Stockmeyer's locked trunk. Inside were books, notebooks, journals, and other items related to Stockmeyer's quest for eternal life. Some local children decided to see what Dr. Benton was up to, and one night they went to his cabin. They looked in the window and saw a wild-looking Dr. Benton conducting experiments in a full-fledged laboratory. Apparently, Dr. Benton was picking up where Professor Stockmeyer had left off. Not long after, it's said that disturbing things began to happen. Animals in the area began to mysteriously die. Dead horses, cows, and sheep were found with a wound behind the left ear. Corpses went missing only to be discovered later with the same strange wound behind the left ear. Soon, Dr. Benton's cabin was found abandoned. He had vanished without a trace. Tom Benton's reign of terror. Hikers on Mount Moosilauke began to see a white-haired figure in a long black cape, and people suspected that it was Dr. Benton. The suspicions were confirmed in 1825, when a small girl was kidnapped from her yard in Benton. A search party followed footprints into Little Tunnel Ravine. Evil laughter was heard from a cliff above them. A man with long white hair and a black cape was holding the screaming girl in his arms. Before anyone knew it, the girl was hurled to her death from the cliff. The caped figure was identified by everyone present as none other than Dr. Tom Benton. After this incident, Dr. Benton, or someone who was thought to be Dr. Benton, began to conduct a reign of terror. In the 1860s, the Prospect House Hotel, later to be called the Tip Top House, was built on Mount Moosilauke. 2 loggers were hired to stay overnight at the hotel, and one was later found dead with a wound behind the left ear. The other logger was never found. A railroad worker who was helping to build a logging railroad was also found dead with the telltale wound. In 1942, students from Dartmouth found the Tip Top House burned to the ground. Once again, Dr. Benton came into question, and the cause of the fire was never discovered. In the 1970s, Dartmouth students had another run-in with Dr. Benton. A student went rock climbing in Joby Dunk Ravine and was later found unconscious. When questioned, he said that he had been pushed by caped figure, whom had been hiding behind the rocks. Dr. Benton sightings are as recent as 2003. Evan Scow, hiking on Mount Moosilauke, discovered old-fashioned boot prints on an old trail where there had been no footprints just minutes before. Joseph Citro says in his book Passing Strange, perhaps, like the metaphorical ball of snow, stories get bigger and pick up a little alien matter as they roll along. Over the years, perhaps the story of Dr. Tom Benton has picked up a little alien matter. People continue to believe that something dark has been happening on Mount Moosilauke for hundreds of years. Maybe Dr. Benton did find the secret of eternal life after all. Strange tales of horror in the desert. Deserts are stark, barren places that seem to be natural habitats for the spooky and supernatural. With their vast expanses of sand, scrub, and unchanging, desolate surroundings, deserts seem to lie somewhere in another realm beyond time and reality. They are scary places, remote, deadly, and remorseless, posing challenges for life that has evolved there and to anyone foolhardy to enter this domain unprepared. It is perhaps no wonder that it is the deserts of the world that have become the settings for numerous tales of horror, sinister mysteries, and unfathomable supernatural dread. From spectral evil to ferocious mystery beasts, here we take a journey through these lonely, sandy expanses, to pry at some of the weird, spine-tingling, and terrifying enigmas that permeate them. One of the unseen dangers lurking within the desert are the mysterious creatures, sometimes malicious and malignant, that stalk through land. In the sun-scorched, burning wilderness of a place called Borrego Sink, 45 miles SE of Borrego Springs, California, there have been reported terrifying encounters between man and mystery beast. The desert may seem to be a strange place to find Bigfoot, but not only have they been reported in this savage wasteland, but they seem to be of a rather aggressive variety, especially the ones that have come to be known as the Borrego Sasquatch. One such incident occurred in 1939, when a man was camping alone in one of the many dry gulches of the area. The man was awoken in the middle of the night by a band of two-legged hairy creatures stalking about his camp on the fringes of the campfire's light. The beasts were described as having white or silver fur and possessed piercing red eyes that glowed in the dark. The pack of creatures circled the camp menacingly for some time but seemed to be somewhat afraid of the fire and kept their distance until they finally slunk off back into the desert. 30 years later in the same region, a man by the name of Harold Lancaster had his own frightening encounter as he was camping in the sink. Lancaster described how an enormous, hair-covered, bipedal creature stalked out of the wilderness and lumbered straight towards him in an intimidating manner. The man, fearing that he was about to be attacked, fired his revolver into the air in an effort to scare the monster away. Whatever the creature was, the gunshots did the trick and the thing reportedly jumped around 3 feet into the air before glaring at Lancaster and running off into the brush. Borrego Sink is not the only place in the desert with its share of ominous man-beasts. In a place called Deadman's Hole, located 7 miles from Warner Springs on Highway 79, a string of vicious, unsolved murders occurred back in the 19th century that have long been blamed on a malicious, marauding Sasquatch. In 1858 the first victim was killed under mysterious circumstances, followed by more slayings over the years. A Frenchman who was slaughtered in his cabin, a prospector named David Blair who was killed by what looked like a knife attack, and a woman named Belinda who was strangled and mutilated. The story may have just been chalked up to an insane killer on the rampage had it not been for a curious story that surfaced in 1888. 2 hunters were out hunting in an area known as Dark Canyon when they came across a cave full of the scattered remains of various mutilated animals. As they investigated the cave, the hunters reported being attacked by a huge, man-like beast covered in matted black hair and with huge hands and feet. According to the hunters, they opened fire on the beast and killed it, after which its body was apparently moved to San Diego and shown to police. At the time, a paper called the San Diego Union ran the story and claimed that the rampaging mystery creature had been the one responsible for the murders, causing quite a public stir in the process. Oddly, the paper ran a story the following day dismissing the article as a mere April Fool's joke. It is unknown if there was ever really a body or if the creature really existed, but what is known is that the mysterious murders remain unsolved. Another strange case involving some sort of humanoid creature comes from the deserts of the Mexican state of Chihuahua. At the end of 1989 and the beginning of 1990, a group of teenagers were on a mission to explore the caves of a place called Cerro Pajarito when they came across something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. As the group was exploring one of the caves, they came upon the discovery of a dead deer and a doe that were freshly killed and exhibited 3 odd perforations on their necks that formed a triangular pattern. In the surrounding area, there were footprints that looked like those of a puma, but it soon became apparent that no puma had done this. The group suddenly heard blood-curdling squealing sounds and the air became pervaded by a stench described as smelling like burning wood. The terrified group of teenagers looked and saw a hunched-over, humanoid figure crouched upon a rock outcropping about 15 meters away from them. The creature apparently started bounding towards them and one of the groups emptied his pistol at it, although the bullets seemed to have no effect. As the panicked group turned tail and ran for dear life, they reported passing yet another humanoid creature that was described as being metallic green in color and standing only 80 centimeters high. Killer Sasquatch and weird humanoid entities running amok are not the only mystery animals said to terrorize the world's deserts. Moving across the world to the Sahara Desert, we find bizarre stories of giant desert snakes prowling the wasteland in the desert's northern reaches. Desert nomads of the area have long spoken of enormous, monstrous serpents up to 4 meters long, known to the locals as tagarga, which are said to be venomous and capable of devouring goats, sheep, and even camels. In the 1950s, nomads reported a large number of incidents involving the giant snakes and appealed to colonial authorities for help. A French army detachment was allegedly sent out into the desert sands near a place called Beni Unif in an effort to track down the beasts. According to the reports, the French contingent came across a snake that was 20 meters long, so large that it required machine gun fire to kill. The skin was allegedly kept, but was later lost. This is not the only reported skin of the creatures to have been found. In the same area, a local man allegedly shot and killed a snake measuring around 15 feet long that had horns and a crest of hair on its head. The bizarre creature's skin was apparently exhibited for a while before it was purchased by a private collector for a reported 45,000 francs and has not been seen since. The giant mystery snakes were seen again in 1967 when a bulldozer operator by the name of Hamza Rahmani was working on the construction of a dam in Morocco and spotted a 9-meter-long snake with a mane of hair on its head that was rather oddly eating engine grease. The startled bulldozer driver alleged rammed the thing with the bulldozer blade and killed it. The construction site was apparently a popular haunt for the creatures because several more were subsequently seen in the vicinity. A 10-meter-long snake with horns that was seen in 1968 and another 15-meter-long one spotted in 1969. It is not known what happened to the body of the serpent allegedly killed by Rahmani. The horrors of the desert come not only from the land of the flesh and blood, but also from beyond the realm of the living, and the desert harbors various seemingly paranormal horrors as well. One well-known story is that of the Lady in White of the mining town of Vallecito, in Calaveras County, California. The story goes that an ill young woman arrived here by stage in the late 1850s on her way to Sacramento to meet up with her lover. The ravages of travel, malnutrition, and lack of water had taken their toll on the woman, and although townsfolk tried their best to save her, she soon perished. When the bag she had been carrying was examined, among the various belongings was found an immaculate, laced, brand new white dress that was speculated to have been her wedding dress. The dead woman was dressed in the dress and buried at Campo Santo nearby the stage station. Since that time, the ghostly woman has been often seen on moonless nights wandering around the town in her white dress. Although this ghost is not known to be malicious, she is reported to instill a distinct sense of unease and fear in those that see her. Vallecito also has the distinction of being the lair of a spectral horse that holds the key to a long-lost desert treasure. It all started with the botched hold-up of a stagecoach on its way to Vallecito station carrying an estimated $65,000 in cash. As the four would-be robbers made their escape, the stagecoach driver fired at them and took one of the men down. Oddly, the driver found two bodies where he expected to find one, and surmised that one of the bandits had killed a member of his own party as well, possibly so that he could have a larger share of the loot. The two remaining thieves made their way into the desert wasteland and buried their loot before heading into town to have drinks. It is at this point that the two are said to have had a drunken argument, and the bandit leader went to get his white horse, after which he barged into the establishment atop the horse and maliciously shot his partner, who before dying managed to shoot back and kill the horse-mounted leader of the gang. The horse, spooked by the loud gunfire, fled into the desert and was never seen again, at least alive. The story goes that if anyone approaches the secret stash of loot, the ghost of the white horse will come stampeding out of the desert to chase them away before vanishing into thin air. Not far from the Vallecito stage station is another supposedly haunted locale, a place called Carrizo Wash. It is said that a ghostly stagecoach known as the Phantom Stage can be seen from time to time blazing across the desert, pulled by a team of 4 spectral mules and driven by a mysterious hunched-over shadowy figure. The ghostly stagecoach is said to slow down by where Carrizo Station once stood, only to seemingly realize that is not there anymore and continue on into the desert badlands. A spooky element of the story is that the Phantom Stage is said to leave behind rut marks from its wheels, as well as the footprints of the mules. The Phantom Stagecoach has been linked to another legend of the area, that of a lost treasure of gold coins that was carried within a stagecoach during the 1860s. Legend has it that a stagecoach was loaded with gold coins and headed out from El Paso on its way to San Diego when in the vicinity of the Fish and Coyote Mountains near Yuma, Arizona, it was held up by robbers. The robbers shot the driver dead, who slumped over in his seat. The stage then apparently continued on as the spooked horses dragged it on into the desert, where it disappeared into the desolate badlands. There are those who believe that the phantom stagecoach is the ghostly incarnation of the stagecoach, eternally looping about its original route. Perhaps an even more bizarre phantom vehicle is reported from the coastal desert region of Brazil's northern region of Maranhão. Here there is said to be a spectral, phantom jeep that the locals refer to as caveira, which tears through the harsh wasteland where there are no roads and brush-strewn rocky gulches that even an off-road vehicle would not be able to navigate. The phantom vehicle is said to drive about aimlessly and sometimes race around doing donuts out in the barren landscape. The ghostly jeep is said to have headlights that can become dazzlingly bright enough to blind eyewitnesses, and the blue-tinted illumination is known to light up the desert as if it were broad daylight. The jeep apparently has a mischievous streak, with the rather disconcerting habit of bearing down on witnesses as if to run them over only to vanish right before impact, leaving the terrified, baffled victim in a state of confusion. The Mangueiras River of the area also has stories of mysterious phantom boats that are said to similarly put themselves on collision courses with fishing boats only to disappear before colliding with them. Other apparitions of the desert can supposedly be found at a place called the Yaqui Well, in the deserts of America's Southwest, where three ghostly entities are said to emerge and dance about on nights of the full moon. The story behind the dancing ghosts begins with three emigrants to the area who arrived at the well after almost dying of thirst on their journey to find a short route through the desert from Yuma to California. Upon reaching the well, one of the emigrants died soon after drinking from the well, and his companions noticed some gold nuggets fall out of the dead man's pocket. Unsure of where the gold had come from, the two remaining men soon became overcome with greed and a heated argument ensued, during which one of the men drowned his companion in the well. An Indian who had been watching the violent fiasco reported that the remaining man went into a delirious frenzy and ran off into the desert maniacally shouting "Gold! Gold!" before disappearing forever. It is said that on hot summer nights of a full moon, one of the dead men rises from the muddy waters of the well, another appears from the surrounding brush, and the other arrives on a cool breeze from the desert, after which they join hands and cavort around the well before disappearing, leaving the area much chillier than its surroundings. One of the scarier phantoms of the desert is an apparition that takes on the appearance of an 8-foot-tall glowing skeleton with a lantern in its chest, which roams the Badlands between Superstition Mountain and 17 Palms in the state of Arizona. This rather frightening and monstrous specter was reportedly first seen way back in the 1800s by a prospector rather appropriately named Charlie Arizona. Arizona was settling down in his camp for the night when he heard his burros acting up on the edge of camp. When the prospector went to investigate, he reportedly saw a huge skeleton 8 feet tall with a lantern glowing through its rib cage shambling about the desert. The sinister apparition was described as seemingly looking for something out among the scrub brush, which it did for some time before wandering off over a ridge. The skeleton was then seen several more times by people camping out in the desert, and two adventurous young men decided to actually go out in search of the thing. After spending 3 nights in the desert looking for it, the glowing ghost skeleton finally appeared out in the desert wandering around aimlessly, at first making itself known as merely a bobbing inexplicable light, but clearly the specter on closer inspection. The adventurers fired at it with rifles, but the wraith was impervious to their gunfire and continued on its way unfazed. The 2 men allegedly followed the skeleton for 3 miles through rugged terrain before they lost it in a canyon. Locals believed that the ghostly skeleton was the spirit of a miner looking for his lost secret mine. A potent local legend has long been that of Peg Leg Smith's Lost Mine, a lost mine full of gold that has been the quarry of many ultimately failed expeditions to find it. The desert is an eerie, scary place at times. For here among the eternal shifting sands and unchanging landscape lurk mysterious animals and spectral apparitions that roam the barren badlands, gullies, ridges, and scrubland of these forgotten places. Deserts are natural places for mysteries, and mysteries they have in spades. Here in the most unforgiving terrain on earth there lie enigmas and horrors that will perhaps forever remain ensconced in the dusty sands of this little understood realm. Some more owl/alien related stuff. Red-eyed owlman or black-eyed alien. One of the most fascinating aspects of the UFO phenomenon, and particularly so that which focuses on the alien abduction controversy, is one which makes a connection between encounters of the unearthly kind and owls. There are numerous reports on file where people who have undergone UFO experiences report sightings of anomalous owls. And by anomalous I mean owls that, a. manifest directly before or after the encounter and in the same location, and b. seem to be much larger than the average, known kind of owl. This has led to an intriguing theory, that the sightings of owls are actually nothing of the sort. They may be nothing less than skillfully created screen memories which are implanted into the mind of the abductee or the experiencer, with the specific intent of masking the true nature of what occurred. Whitley Strieber is the author of what is probably the most widely recognized book on the alien abduction phenomenon, the best-selling Communion, which was published in 1987, and the cover of which displays a near-hypnotic image of an alien entity. It may not be a coincidence that immediately after the first abduction experience that Strieber recalled, on December 26, 1985, his mind was filled with owl-based imagery. Strieber's sister had her own experience with an anomalous owl in the early 1960s. Strieber said that as his sister was driving between the Texas towns of Comfort and Careville, and after the witching hour had struck, she was terrified to see a huge light sail down and cross the road ahead of her. A few minutes later an owl flew in front of the car. I have to wonder if that is not a screen memory, but my sister has no sense of it. This all brings me to something else, a creature that has become a staple part of a completely different subject, cryptozoology, which is the study and search for unknown animals, such as Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster. Or, based on what I'm about to say now, maybe they are not so unconnected, after all. In November 2013, I penned an article for the New Page Books blog titled The Owlman of the Woods. In part, the article said, in 1976 the dense trees surrounding Monnon Old Church, Cornwall, England became a veritable magnet for a diabolical beast that was christened the Owlman. The majority of those that crossed paths with the creature asserted that it was human-like in both size and design, and possessed a pair of large wings, fiery red eyes, claws, and exuded an atmosphere of menace. No wonder people make parallels with Mothman. It all began during the weekend of Easter 1976, when two young girls, June and Vicky Melling, had an encounter of a truly nightmarish kind in Monnon Woods. The girls were on holiday with their parents when they saw a gigantic, feathery bird man hovering over the 13th century church. Since that fateful day, a handful of additional reports of the so-called Owlman have surfaced, collectively suggesting the presence in the area of a somewhat Mothman-like beast of cryptozoological or supernatural proportions, or possibly a combination of both. But now, however, there is a new angle to the mystery. Just a couple of days ago, I received an email from a woman now living in the English town of Lowestoft, but who previously lived very close to Monnon, and specifically in the small Cornwall village of Gweek, the distance between which, by car, is approximately 6.5 miles. It transpires that in 1998 she had a profound UFO encounter while taking the road from Monnon to Gweek. It was after 11 p.m. and the woman was driving home after visiting a friend in Monnon. She had barely left the little village when she saw what she could only describe as a UFO, one that appeared at the side of the road, around the size of a large beach ball and glowing bright orange. The next thing she knew, she was parked at the side of the road, with what she was able to determine was no less than 2 hours of time unaccounted for. But there was something else. As she came out of her groggy state, she caught sight of a huge owl-like creature, but which had somewhat humanoid characteristics attached to it, too. It was hovering in the air, at a height of around 15 feet, but was not employing the use of its wings to keep it aloft. Given the fact that this was practically on the doorstep of where the Owlman was seen back in 1976, and since, too, the idea that the two issues are unconnected is highly unlikely. The witness admitted she knew of the Owlman legend. Living so close to Monnon, it would be more astonishing had she not heard of it. There was little more she could tell me, beyond the facts surrounding the sighting of the curious ball of light, the period of missing time, and the appearance of a humanoid owl, as I term it. This particular encounter, which has not been publicized before, set me thinking. What if the owlman of Cornwall is not a beast of cryptozoological proportions, after all? What if, instead, it is some strange manifestation of the UFO phenomenon, one that is designed to trick the witnesses into thinking they have encountered a large owl, when, in reality, the event was of an otherworldly nature? A screen memory, in other words. Maybe we need to re-evaluate the true nature of the enigmatic owlman? More desert-related weirdness? I sure think so. The highway to hell. Driving alone along a desolate, remote desert highway can be a slightly unnerving experience that touches us on some deep level of our psyche. The endless, monotonous surroundings stretching as far as the eye can see can instill a distinct sense of time standing still and of crushing loneliness, as if civilization or perhaps even the universe somehow no longer exists beyond the road, and all that remains are the relentless expanses of cacti, brush, boulders, and desert dirt. Along with this feeling of stark desolation comes a certain level of menace, with the prospect of somehow getting stuck out in some untamed, unforgiving wilderness along one of these deserted stretches of road enough to create a palpable dread that pokes at the edges of our basest primal fears. Perhaps nowhere is the sinister air of danger more pronounced than on one particular highway in America's Four Corners region of sections of Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico that has garnered such an intense, enduring reputation for being cursed and haunted that has rightfully earned its morbid nickname the Devil's Highway. Running through Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, and Arizona, the highway formerly known as US Route 666, now known as US 491 in Colorado and Utah, and the now separate US 191 in Arizona, meanders through almost 200 miles of rugged, sweeping desert wilderness and passes through the tribal nations of the Navajo Nation and Ute Mountain Ute Tribe. Much of the route is remote and deserted, with long stretches through vast, seemingly uninhabited wasteland that harbors little to no signs of civilization. The route is perhaps one of the most well-known and notorious highways in America, and has a long, bizarre history of all manner of weirdness, bad luck, inexplicable accidents, ghosts, apparitions, specters, and various other unexplained phenomena. The beginning of Route 666's rise to infamy as one of the strangest and most haunted highways in America can perhaps be traced back to its unfortunate numbering. The American Association of State Highway Officials assigned the number in 1926, and since the highway was the sixth branch of the now defunct Route 66, the assignment turned out as 666. Although the number was completely keeping with the guidelines for numbering highways and in no way intentional, it did not take long for people to notice and start making the connection between the route and the Christian number of the beast or mark of the beast. This sinister connotation was compounded by the fact that statistics at the time seemed to show that the highway had a higher number of accidents and road fatalities than was considered normal, particularly along the New Mexico stretch. There were such a large number of fatalities along the road that at one time, Route 666 was named one of the 20 most dangerous highways in America. Although there are a lot of factors that could account for the high number of accidents, such as poor road conditions or the hypnotizing effect that the monotonous scenery can have on tired drivers, many became convinced that there was a link between the misfortune, deaths, and the highway's satanic number. In addition to the accidents and deaths, many who drove along the route told of being beset with a mysterious and pervasive feelings of anxiety, dread, or a sense of impending evil. There was also supposedly a high rate of car malfunctions and complications on Route 666, with a large number of incidences of overheating, engine troubles, flat or blown tires, electrical malfunctions, and numerous other freak accidents. This sense of terror the highway invoked, the high number of car troubles that seemed to happen there, and the various deadly accidents, some of which have become almost like urban legends, were at the time enough to dissuade many from venturing onto the highway at all, and it was not long before Route 666 was being referred to as the Devil's Highway or Satan's Speedway. This all may not seem particularly supernatural for some, After all, accidents happen on highways, and driving along a bleak, deserted stretch of road at night can certainly give people the jitters, but the weirdness of Route 666 does not end there. In addition to the strange feelings of anxiety and dread, as well as all of the accidents and breakdowns, there is a plethora of strange stories originating from on or around the highway. Perhaps some of the most intriguing are the various tales of alleged specters and spooks that inhabit Route 666. One of the most infamous and legendary of these apparitions is that of a menacing black sedan, also sometimes referred to as Satan's sedan, that allegedly prowls the highway to terrorize drivers. The reports of the sedan share many similar characteristics and usually follow the same basic scenario. The driver will be driving along the highway and be besieged by a potent feeling of inexplicable terror upon sunset. As soon as the sun slips below the horizon and darkness descends, the driver will notice a pair of flickering headlights moving rapidly and inexorably closer from the distance behind them. This is almost always said to happen right after sundown and on the nights of a full moon. Accelerating away is said to do no good, as the phantom vehicle will close in no matter how fast you try to outrun it. What happens when the threatening black sedan inevitably arrives differs from story to story. Some say that the mysterious car will pull up beside them and pace them for a time before speeding into the black of night, sometimes even honking its horn or revving its formidable engine in an intimidating manner. Others have claimed that the car will bump or smash into them from behind or side-swipe them before roaring off. Still other witnesses have described the sedan barreling towards them at high speed with no sign of slowing or stopping, and being forced off of the road onto the shoulder only for the spectral car to blaze off into the desert night. Those who have tried to get a look at the driver of the malicious black sedan have variously stated that no one seems to be driving, that a shadowy figure is hunched over the wheel, or that the windows are all tinted completely black. Many witnesses have alleged to have been set upon by the ominous vehicle only to look up and find that it has completely vanished without a trace, leaving them once again alone in the cold desert night with their fear. The mysterious black sedan of Route 666 is not the only phantom vehicle said to frequent the road. Another popular legend concerns a ghostly semi-truck that is purportedly manned by an aggressive demonic entity. The truck is said to careen down the highway at breathtaking speeds, chasing or even smashing cars off of the road, and sometimes terrorizing people who have broken down, many of whom have described having the feeling that the truck was intentionally trying to target them as it sped by. Legend has it that the deranged spirit at the wheel of the truck abhors and holds some grudge against the living. Author Linda Dunning, who has written extensively on the phenomena associated with Route 666, describes a close encounter her husband had with the phantom truck in her book Specters in Doorways, The History and Hauntings of Utah. Dunning recounts how her husband saw a truck that seemed to be on fire speeding along the road towards him at speeds of at least 130 miles per hour, with sparks flying off of the wheels and flames belching forth from the smokestack. Dunning's husband, fearing for his life, apparently pulled off the road and fled his vehicle in a panic as the flaming, speeding truck roared off in a trail of whirling fire and sparks. The man was only able to continue on his way after getting his wits back and recovering from the terrifying ordeal. Demonic motorists also share the highway with a multitude of other spectral creatures and beings. One infamous figure said to haunt the deserted landscape is an apparition of a young girl dressed all in white who appears at the side of the road at night, sometimes posing as a hitchhiker and other times standing right in the middle of the highway. Her forlorn expression and the dark, forbidding desert stretching for miles around her often prompt concerned motorists to stop and offer the girl assistance. When they do, the pale, white-clad young lady is said to promptly begin to dematerialize, blink out of existence, or otherwise vanish as if she were never there. Unlike her malignant ghostly cousins at the wheels of the truck and sedan, the girl in white is apparently not aggressive, and is mostly thought of as harmless, albeit unnerving. More dangerous are the packs of demon dogs, also called the Hounds of Hell, that reputedly stalk the wilderness around Route 666. They have reportedly been seen prowling the desert scrubland near the highway and are even known to chase down cars on the road. Motorists who have been set upon by the dogs have described these vicious mystery canines as having supernatural speed, able to keep pace with their vehicles while snarling and snapping their jaws. It is claimed that the phantom dogs will actively attack cars, and that their claws and fangs are sharp and powerful enough to shred tires and gouge metal. More dramatic reports tell of the devil dogs smashing through car windows in an attempt to maul the people inside. A few motorists have also described being certain that they had hit one of the hounds with their car, only for the creature to run off completely uninjured. It is perhaps not surprising that many of the many accidents reported along the highway have been attributed to these ferocious packs of roving, spectral dogs. Adding to the bizarre menagerie of ghostly animals found along Route 666 is the presence of shape-shifting entities the native tribes of the region refer to as skinwalkers. The highway passes through a few sacred Native American sites, including two mountains known as Ute Mountain and an extinct volcanic core called Shiprock, and as such there is a good amount of Native American lore imbuing the land that Route 666 sits upon. According to native legends, skinwalkers are the spirits of evil medicine men with the ability to magically transform into various animals such as coyotes, crows, or wolves. Once in animal form, the skinwalkers have the unnerving habit of running out in front of vehicles, or even entering the vehicles only to morph back into human form, usually in the back seat, and terrify the driver. Various instances of phantom passengers suddenly appearing in cars have been attributed to the antics of skinwalkers. Far from mere mischief-making, native legends say that the skinwalkers carry out this harassment in order to steal or devour the souls of any who happen to crash and die as a result. The Native Americans of the region believe that one way to prevent a skinwalker from appearing in one's car is to make sure there is nowhere for it to sit. As with the packs of demon dogs, skinwalkers appearing in front of startled drivers or even in their back seats and causing them to swerve or crash are believed by some to be at the root of at least some of the traffic accidents along this cursed highway. Other bizarre phenomena regularly plague drivers along Route 666 as well. There are many instances of drivers reporting that time has a habit of somehow stretching out or slowing down here, claiming that it took much longer to traverse a certain distance than expected. Conversely, there are also those who claim to have experienced large chunks of lost time or to have seemingly teleported over vast distances. Some of these lost time reports describe the victim somehow disappearing in one location and appearing in another several hours later, often far from their starting point and with no idea of where they had been or what they had done in the time that had passed between the two. There are additionally stories of drivers who have disappeared without a trace for days or even weeks, only to suddenly reappear somewhere along the highway with no recollection of anything that had gone on during the time they were missing. These people who have experienced lost time or have disappeared only to come back are perhaps the lucky ones, as there is also a good amount of instances of people vanishing along Route 666 only to never be heard from again. The frequent discovery of mysteriously abandoned cars with no sign of the original owners is a grim testament to this, and for some of the missing, no car has ever been found at all. All of this strangeness and paranormal phenomena became so associated with Route 666's foreboding number that the government was eventually convinced to change the numbering due to an outcry of growing unease and fear among the public concerning the road, as well as the threat the stigma of the route's number posed to the economy of the area. Not only were businesses affected by the lack of travelers willing to travel along the cursed highway, but development of the region stagnated due to the strong aversion many had to the perceived satanic number. In order to appease those long convinced that Route 666 was an evil place held in the grip of the devil, and to allay fears of the infamous cursed road and to perhaps remove some of the stigma attached to it, the name of the highway was renamed to US 191 along the Arizona stretch in 1992 and to Route 491 in the other three states in 2003. It is often said that the mere renumbering of Route 666 had the effect of significantly reducing the amount of fatalities and accidents along the road, as if removing the number of the beast somehow robbed this enigmatic place of its dark power and left it bereft of its curse. There is the belief out there that maybe the number itself was attracting some dark force to this barren highway to wreak havoc on those who traveled it. Perhaps more likely is that the highway has seen significant development in recent years. Long neglected and poorly maintained, very few improvements or repairs had ever been done on Route 666 until around 2003, when several major construction projects were undertaken to improve overall safety on the highway as well as to appease native tribes of the area that had long complained of the negative effect the decrepit roads were having on tourism and their economy. The construction projects were deliberately timed to coincide with the rechristening of the highway, and there was even a ceremony performed by a native medicine man to cleanse the newly numbered highway of evil spirits. Considering the amount of work done to improve the road since then, it seems that this increased level of safety is more likely the reason for the drop in traffic fatalities rather than any lifting of evil curses or eviction of sinister spirits. Nevertheless, the stories still come in from time to time of phantoms, ghosts, and strange disappearances along the road. Regardless of what the highway is called now, the former Route 666 still holds much of the mystique and mystery it has always had. Whether it is actually the devil himself or not, many still believe that there is a certain potent, malevolent force that pervades the land here and works its dark influences on the highway. Is there something going on along this stretch of bleak desert road in the middle of nowhere that defies our current understanding of our world? Or is this all just creepy stories and urban legends? Whatever the answer may be, dark, lonely highways can certainly have a distinct power to deeply affect us and unnerve us on some level. An ability to stir up primal feelings of desolation, loneliness, despair, and fear. It as if some of these roads penetrate not only through rugged wilderness to the horizon beyond, but also through the human psyche into the weird realms of our subconscious. It seems that the bizarre, inscrutable Route 666 is certainly one of these. Now we go from the sands, to the seas. Strange sounds of the deep dark sea. The world's oceans are vast, enigmatic places full of countless mysteries and strange sights. Yet the mysterious secrets of the seas are not confined solely to what we can see, but rather also what we can hear. Far from the stoic, silent underwater world many may imagine, the acoustics of the ocean are in fact awash with a constant cacophony of seismic activity, boats, sonar, marine creatures, cracking icebergs, undersea volcanoes, and many others. While many of these sounds have definite, known or mundane sources, there are others that have long managed to elude any sort of easy explanation. These are the eerie, unexplained sounds that pervade our planet's oceans, standing out from all others as oddities that continue to defy simple answers. Many of the mysterious audio anomalies of the ocean came to the attention of scientists with the help of a network of underwater microphones, called hydrophones, which were set up in the 1960s by the US Navy for the purpose of monitoring the movements of Soviet submarines. This network was called the Sound Surveillance System, or SOSUS, and was sprawled out along the ocean floor throughout various regions around the globe. The microphones were typically located on the seabed deep below the surface in a place known as the Deep Sound Channel, a place where sound can travel thousands of kilometers due to the effects of the unique pressure and temperature gradient inherent to the zone, which effectively funnels sounds without any interference across vast distances. For years, the SOSUS system was used exclusively to listen in on the audio signatures of submarines and track their locations, and the various other potential scientific applications for such an extensive network of deep-sea hydrophones were never really explored. It was not until the end of the Cold War that the network's primary purpose became obsolete and the system of hydrophones was allowed to be accessed by civilian scientists. By analyzing the audio signatures of incoming sounds as they arrive at different microphones, scientists were finally able to locate and analyze a whole new domain of acoustics, and also one of mystery. What they heard down there in the depths was often able to be fairly quickly identified due to each sound's unique sound signature, but the scientists also realized that many of the sounds were not so readily categorized. These mysterious noises of the deep come in a myriad of different types. Some are low frequency and others high, some short bursts and others long, continuous wails, and some happen only once while others can go on for years. The one thing they all have in common is that nobody really knows where they come from. One of the strangest of these enigmatic sounds is the one known as upsweep. The sound was first detected in 1991 emanating from across the entire Pacific. Besides this vast range, upsweep showed a bizarre and totally unprecedented sound signature the likes of which no one had ever heard before in decades of listening in on ocean sounds. Upsweep is comprised of persistent, ongoing narrow-band upsweeping noises that last for several seconds each. To the ears, the sound itself is described as sounding like the wail of an ambulance or the undulating howl of some huge beast. In addition to its haunting audio signature, upsweep exhibits some other rather unusual characteristics that add to its mystique. The impressive geographical range of the sound makes it difficult to attribute it to any one, localized source. Upsweep is additionally very consistent and uniform in nature, which is unlike the sounds produced by underwater volcanoes or earthquakes. The sound is also highly seasonal, always peaking every spring and autumn for no discernible reason. Furthermore, it has demonstrated remarkable longevity, occurring at peak volume continuously from 1991 to 1994, and even after that reverberating through the ocean at a lower intensity. The sound is seasonally audible even now, and no one is quite sure what it is. One of the first ideas was that upsweep was caused by whales, but this theory was quickly abandoned as the volume was simply too high for any known whales to generate and also did not move around from season to season like the song of migrating whales should have done. The sound also was much too uniform to be attributed to whales, whose songs are typically highly varied in their range, pitch, and amplitude. Seismic explanations were considered as well, but the uniformity and constant nature of upsweep did not fit in with what is typically heard for these events. It was also suggested that the sound could be caused by simple water movements and currents producing a noise something akin to that of wind. Presently, it is thought that perhaps the sound is caused by the oscillation of some liquid as it reacts to coming into contact with lava, and one team of researchers think they have identified the origin of the sound as being in the southern Pacific in the vicinity of volcanic activity, yet the sound still does not conform to the known sound signatures of such events. Despite these various theories, the origin of upsweep remains a mystery. Another bizarre mystery sound is referred to as slowdown, and was first detected in the equatorial Pacific Ocean on May 19, 1997. It has been heard several times a year since, in both the Atlantic and the Pacific, and has been picked up on hydrophones nearly 5,000 kilometers, 3,100 miles, apart. Slowdown is so named for its unusual characteristic of slowing down gradually over the course of 7 minutes. It has been described as sounding like an airplane going by. Slowdown has typically occurred too far from SOSUS hydrophones to get a good fix on the exact point of origin, but one thing that has remained consistent is that it always comes from the south. This has led to speculation that it is perhaps emanating from the Antarctic. It was thought that the sound could perhaps be the result of military exercises using some new technology, but the Navy has denied any such activity in the area and maintains the sounds are not man-made. One theory for the sound has been that the noise is created by the friction created by icebergs grinding against each other, the ocean floor, or even land to come to a halt, which would account for the slowing characteristic and eventual sudden stop of the sound. Additionally, the sound signature of slowdown has been shown to be somewhat similar to that of icebergs scraping together. At the moment, the exact source of the sound remains unknown. The movement of ice has been used to explain away other anomalous sounds as well. One of the weirder sounds picked up on hydrophone arrays is one called Julia. The odd sound was detected in the equatorial Pacific on March 1, 1999, and sounds like a person cooing or whining. It has been speculated that it is most likely the result of a massive iceberg ponderously rubbing against the seafloor. Likewise, yet another sound known as train has been theorized to be that of an iceberg scraping against the seabed. Train sounds just like its name implies, like a distant train going with its wheels clattering along the tracks. Other noises have been chalked up to not ice, but fire. A common explanation for a variety of weird ocean noises is the eruption of undersea volcanoes. One example is the sound known as whistle. Picked up in July 1997, the sound resembles that of a kettle of boiling water. It is thought that it is perhaps caused by an erupting submarine volcano. However, since the sound was only detected once, and on only a single hydrophone, its origin may forever be a mystery. Besides the explanations of ice movement, volcanoes, and earthquakes, there has from time to time been speculation that these mysterious undersea sounds are caused by some sort of unknown sea creature. Perhaps one of the most well-known and baffling anomalous ocean sounds is known as the bloop. Recorded off the southern coast of South America by hydrophones nearly 4,800 kilometers, 3,000 miles, apart, the sound is highly unusual in that it matches several of the common features found in sounds made by biological organisms, such as the rapid variation in frequency common in marine creatures. There is much debate as to what actually produced the noise, with a phenomenon caused by shearing and fracturing ice, called an icequake, being suggested as a more rational explanation, yet several biologists have stood by the theory that it was bellowed by some living organism. It is a romantic notion to be sure that some undiscovered monster of the deep is out there, but since the bloop was heard over such vast distances, it would have to either be something far larger than any known sea creature or be something extremely efficient at producing sound. If it is something so large, then what sort of leviathan can we expect to find lurking in the murky dark? Whether it was made by a natural phenomenon or a terrifying monster, whatever the case may be, the bloop has still not been satisfactorily explained. So what do we make of these anomalous ocean noises? Are they originating from a known source? Are they produced by some new undersea phenomenon we are not yet aware of? Or are these the sounds made by gargantuan mysterious sea creatures hidden within their remote lairs? For now we do not know. We know so little about the deepest recesses, the oceans. We are far from cataloging all of the species that call these places home, and we still have an incomplete knowledge of the various natural phenomena that go on here. We know so little that sometimes seems as if we have two parallel yet distinct worlds existing side by side on the same planet, the world we are familiar with and the alien, little understood realm of the deep blue cold of our oceans. It often feels that our oceans might as well be another, far-away planet. The sea is a noisy place, but this noise is not without meaning. Scientists plan to continue to monitor the hydrophones in the hopes that they will help to uncover some of the ocean's secrets. These listening stations could give us valuable insights into the geological processes raging deep below the waves, as well as important information on the movement and nature of the ice of our poles. It is thought that such information could even help to monitor the progress of our ever rapidly growing climate problems. Just as we are gaining an understanding of these various phenomena, perhaps one day we will be closer to the answers we seek with regards to the mysterious, unexplained sounds of the deep sea as well. Mysteries from another dimension. The idea of other dimensions is an appealing one. It's been called on to explain everything from ghosts and paranormal phenomena to UFOs and even Bigfoot. It's implicit in science fiction concepts such as hyperspace or subspace, which make faster than light travel possible. Esoteric teachers often invoke higher dimensions to explain mystical concepts and experiences. Even mainstream scientists talk about other dimensions when discussing advanced topics such as relativity and string theory. Despite the huge divergence in the way the concept is used, all these disciplines, science, esoterica, science fiction and the paranormal, can trace their interest in other dimensions to a common origin in the 19th century. It seems self-evident that we live in a three-dimensional world. A box has three dimensions: length, width, and height. Each of those dimensions is at right angles to the other two. It's impossible to imagine a fourth dimension at right angles to these three, or at least, it's impossible for most of us. A few people claim they can do it. On the other hand, it's easy to picture fewer than three dimensions. If you draw a square on a flat sheet of paper, then it has just two dimensions. You can fold the piece of paper diagonally, so that the two opposite corners, a long way apart in two-dimensional space, are now almost touching. What was previously a long journey from one corner to another becomes a short journey through the third dimension. The science-fictional idea of hyperspace is a logical extension of this. If you could fold or warp three-dimensional space in higher dimensions, then you could turn a long journey between the stars into a short one. The first reference to curved or warped space occurs not in science fiction, but in a work of mainstream science. It was put forward in 1872 by a German astronomer named Carl Zollner as a possible explanation of a long-standing mystery known as Olbers' paradox. If the universe is infinite in extent, why is it dark at night? Zollner's explanation for the apparent paradox is that the three-dimensional space occupied by the universe is curved in the fourth dimension. Thus distant stars disappear over the horizon just as ships disappear over the horizon on the curved surface of the Earth. This isn't quite the way modern cosmologists would explain Olbers' paradox, although it may be a contributing factor. Although Zollner first arrived at the idea of the fourth dimension in a scientific context, he went on to take it in a more mystical direction. He was a great admirer of the English scientist William Crookes, an outspoken proponent of spiritualism. Zollner went even further than Crookes, by suggesting that spirits live and move in four-dimensional space. What we perceive as ghosts are merely their three-dimensional shadows. With the help of an American psychic named Henry Slade, Zollner carried out a series of experiments to demonstrate that spirits could accomplish tasks that would be physically impossible without access to the fourth dimension. He published his results in 1878 in a book, dedicated to William Crookes, called Transcendental Physics, available to read online. This was one of the first systematic attempts to study the paranormal using scientific methods, although the modern consensus is that Slade was a fraud, who fooled Zollner using sleight-of-hand methods. The concept of the fourth dimension was developed in yet another direction by Charles Howard Hinton. He wasn't a scientist or a mystic, but a mathematician, albeit a somewhat unorthodox one. He believed that striving to visualize four-dimensional objects, which as I said earlier, is all but impossible for most people, was an effective way to expand the mental faculties, a kind of yoga for the mind. Hinton invented various shapes for his students to visualize, including a four-dimensional hypercube which he called a tesseract. His most important work on the subject was a book called A New Era of Thought, published in 1888. Again, the complete book is available to read online. Several people are supposed to have driven themselves insane trying to visualize Hinton's tesseracts. As far as mainstream science is concerned, the fourth dimension became firmly established early in the 20th century with the development of Einstein's theory of relativity. This introduced the concept of a four-dimensional space-time continuum, which combines the three dimensions of space with a fourth dimension representing time. Although the idea of time as the fourth dimension wasn't a new one, the novelty of Einstein's theory lies in the fact that time was no longer independent of the other three dimensions. An object moving close to the speed of light becomes compressed in length and dilated in time. In his general theory of relativity, published in 1916, Einstein was able to explain the phenomenon of gravity in terms of four-dimensional space-time. General relativity was far from being a theory of everything, however. For example, it could not explain electromagnetic forces. During the 1920s, two scientists named Theodore Kaluza and Oscar Klein proposed a theory involving 5 dimensions that would unify gravitation and electromagnetism. That was a step forward, but it was still unable to explain things like nuclear forces. Modern theories of everything need even more dimensions, The present record is held by M theory, which invokes no fewer than 11 dimensions. Bizarre sewer-dwelling beasts of the world. There is a whole other world deep in the dark beneath our feet. As mankind goes about its daily business, with throngs of people hurriedly churning back and forth and endless traffic zipping along on various errands, underground there is a dank, forgotten place that most people never give much thought. Vast, sprawling warrens of underground sewer systems, pipes, and tunnels exist under all of our bustle. Murky, shadowy places full of blackness and silence, secretly coexisting with the upper world of light and tireless human activity. It is perhaps no surprise that such innately spooky places as sewers have long been the setting of a multitude of creepy tales and horror stories. However, what of the mysteries that exist there outside of the world of pure fiction? There are things lurking within the dark, meandering sewers of the world that suggest there is more to these places than we may suspect. Let us take a look at some of the mysterious alleged denizens of the Stygian depths of the world's sewers. Alligators in New York. One of the most enduring and well-known cases of strange animals in sewers is the stories of alligators roaming New York City sewer systems. Accounts of alligators lurking under New York streets date back to the 1930s, when it is said to have been popular for families to buy baby alligators as pets. The story typically goes that when the alligators got too big to be properly cared for, they were flushed down the toilet or otherwise released into the sewer system, where they survived on a diet of rats, garbage, or anything else they could get their teeth into. Over the years, various frightening reports surfaced of sewer workers coming across alligators lurking in the city's sewers. Sometimes the reports were embellished with details such as albino alligators or alligators that had somehow reached freakish sizes larger than normal. There were even stories of alleged mutant alligators that had developed abnormal coloring or other physical anomalies. In 1959, a curious account was reported in the book The World Beneath the City, by Robert Daly, which is a history of the development of utilities in New York City. One chapter of the book is entitled Alligators in the Sewers, and stems from a series of interviews conducted with longtime Commissioner of Sewers in New York, Teddy May. In the account, May explained that alligators had been sighted in the sewers since 1935 by sewer workers, but no one took such reports seriously at first. When the sightings continued and started truly spooking utilities workers, May personally ventured into the sewers. It was there that May was startled to come across alligators with an average length of 2 feet. Seeing that the stories were indeed true, a campaign was launched to eradicate the animals with poisoning, as well as flushing the alligators out to be shot by gun-toting hunters. In the account, May claimed that all of the sewer alligators had been wiped out by 1937. Cryptozoologist Loren Coleman, who has done extensive research on the history of alligators in New York sewers, has uncovered many historical articles outlining actual alligators being found, captured, or killed in the sewers of New York, particularly during the 1930s. The results of his findings have the historical significance of establishing a link with the supposed urban legend of alligators in the sewers and real historical cases of alligators being killed and even officially hunted down there. The results of Coleman's findings were published as Alligators in the Sewers, a journalistic vehicle, in the Journal of American Folklore, October 1979. One intriguing article that Coleman uncovered was a story that originally appeared in the New York Times on February 10, 1935. The article describes how several youths who were shoveling snow into a manhole cover near Harlem River came across an alligator measuring 7 to 8 feet long thrashing about in the icy water below. The teens, led by a Salvatore Condoleezza, proceeded to capture and kill the animal. Many years later, when interviewed about the incident, Condoleezza insisted that the event was true and factual. Articles such as these uncovered by Loren Coleman, as well as the accounts outlined in Daly's book, clearly are at odds with the current official stance that alligators in the sewers of New York have always been pure urban legend. It seems through these accounts that the knee-jerk response of alligators in New York sewers being merely a myth are glossing over some of the history of alligators in fact being found there. Many modern-day reports seem to further point to the reality of alligators in the sewers. On July 22, 2013, a live 8-foot-long alligator was pulled from a sewer near Central Park. The alligator had allegedly long been preying on dogs, which prompted a hunt for it culminating in its capture. The alligator was killed, and an analysis of its stomach contents revealed the remains of at least 2 dogs, some rats, and a wristwatch, fortunately with no hands still attached to it. In 2010, an alligator measuring 2 feet long was found under a car near a sewer opening at Newton Avenue and 29th Street, in the heart of Queens, New York. Surrounded by startled onlookers, an emergency service unit used a long pole and a noose to corral the creature into a cage and capture it. The animal was handed over to city animal care and control officers, who sent it to a wildlife sanctuary. In an perhaps ominous addition to the story, in the wake of the baby alligator's capture, Animal Care and Control spokesman Richard Gentle stated that between 2 to 4 alligators or crocodiles are rescued in the city by his agency every year. It is not known how many of those statistical alligators were recovered from sewers. It seems clear that regardless of whether dramatic reports of giant, mutant albino alligators existing under the streets are true or not, there certainly seems to be some truth to the idea that at least regular alligators can indeed be found in New York City's sewers. Strange, sewer-dwelling humanoids. In 2008, the Daily Mail reported that sewer workers at Southern Waters Treatment Plant in Eastbourne, East Sussex, described being haunted by a strange humanoid figure said to look something like a zombie. The figure reportedly would follow the workers around and occasionally laugh at them menacingly. In addition, workers told of hearing mysterious muffled conversations emanating from behind tunnel walls. The creature allegedly scared the workers so much that they were afraid to enter the tunnels to work. After persistent reports of the strange figure stalking workers, Mark Way, a sewage treatment worker, got permission from his bosses to hire a paranormal investigator to launch an investigation. Although no physical evidence of any such creature was found, the parapsychologist reported immediately feeling a strong presence, and said there was definitely something unusual there. Another report of a strange sewer-dwelling humanoid comes from an article by Michael Burke entitled Green Thing Sparks Rumors, in the New Valley Dispatch, March 5, 1981. The article describes a harrowing account of a small, 4-foot-tall humanoid creature said to look like something half human and half dinosaur, which was seen emerging from a sewer in New Kensington, PA. A group of youth allegedly chased the creature, and one even managed to grab the thing's tail, upon which it let out a screeching cry prompting the startled boy to let go. The dinosauroid humanoid then reportedly slipped away back into a sewer tunnel. Interestingly, the incident took place near Dixonville, PA, where several miners were allegedly killed or went missing in 1944 due to an alleged alien creature said to be lurking in one of the mine shafts there. The mysterious monster was said to lurk in the darkness and snatch away hapless, unsuspecting miners. Whether this rather spooky story has any connection with the case of the saurian humanoid or not, it is still a bizarre account in its own right. The Black Swine of London. In the 1800s, a bizarre story circulated around London that the sewers of Hampstead were home to a population of strange, black pigs said to roam about in the filthy, slimy darkness. The story goes that a pregnant sow somehow made its way down into the sewers through a drain or some other opening, where it got lost and subsisted on the constant influx of offal and garbage. The sow subsequently gave birth to and reared its young in the sewer, and it is alleged that the pigs multiplied there. It is said that the black pigs of the sewers became numerous and were known for their aggressiveness and ferocity. Throughout the 19th century, reports of sightings of very large black pigs lurking in the sewers propagated the story to the point that it became somewhat akin to London's own version of alligators in the sewers of New York. There were various accounts of the Black Swine of Hampstead, and a good number of Londoners at the time believed the creatures were down there. The Daily Telegraph, October 10, 1859, made mention of the sewer-dwelling black swine in an editorial which said, "This London is an amalgam of worlds within worlds, and the occurrences of every day convince us that there is not one of these worlds but has its special mysteries and its generic crimes. Exaggeration and ridicule often attach to the vastness of London, and the ignorance of its penetralia common to us who dwell therein. It has been said that beasts of chase still roam in the verdant fastnesses of Grosvenor Square, that there are undiscovered patches of primeval forest in Hyde Park, and that Hampstead sewers shelter a monstrous breed of black swine, which have propagated and run wild among the slimy feculents, and whose ferocious snouts will one day uproot Highgate Archway, while they make Holloway intolerable with their grunting. With the coming of the 20th century, stories of the black swine of London sewers faded into obscurity. It is now considered to be mostly a largely forgotten urban legend, yet it is still intriguing to think about whether these stories had their foundation in some grain of truth, as is often the case with many such supposed myths. Pigs infesting the sewers? Sure, why not? The bizarre sewer monster of North Carolina. In April 2009, the company Malfris Construction sent a surveillance camera into the sewer system beneath Cameron Village in Raleigh, North Carolina, in order to examine the infrastructure of the pipes. During their investigation, the camera came across something that no one had ever expected to encounter down there. Slimy, pulsating blobs attached to the wall which appeared to be living organisms of some kind. The weird blobs were even seen to visibly react to the light of the camera, seeming to flinch and draw away from it. The story immediately became a sensation, and the bizarre creatures were nicknamed the Cameron Village Sewer Blob. News stories ran with it, and video footage of the grotesque blobs captured by the camera became insanely popular on YouTube. The internet was awash in discussion and debate as to the nature of the creatures, with theories ranging from some kind of undiscovered animal, to mutant monsters, to aliens from another world. At first it was speculated that the footage was even a hoax, but Raleigh Public Works issued a statement officially acknowledging that indeed the footage was very real. Scientists at the time were just as stumped as everyone else. No one had ever really seen anything quite like it, and biologists for Raleigh Public Utilities were at a loss to explain what the organisms were. Ed Buchan, the environmental coordinator at the Raleigh Public Utilities Department, at first claimed that he had never seen anything like it in all of his time with the department. For a time, the mysterious, slimy blob phenomenon of Cameron Village was a total enigma. Gradually, scientific theories about what could realistically be responsible for what was caught on the sewer cameras started to emerge. One of the first such theories was that the blobs represented a colony of bryozoans, which are small animals that stick out tentacles to feed and retreat into small tubes when disturbed. Other biologists disagreed with the bryozoan theory. Dr. Timothy S. Wood, a bryozoans expert with the Department of Biological Sciences at Wright State University in Dayton, Ohio, firmly denied that bryozoans could be the culprit, stating, "No, these are not bryozoans. They are clumps of annelid worms, almost certainly tubificids. Normally these occur in soil and sediment, especially at the bottom and edges of polluted streams. In the photo they have apparently entered a pipeline somehow, and in the absence of soil they are coiling around each other. The contractions you see are the result of a single worm contracting and then stimulating all the others to do the same almost simultaneously, so it looks like a single big muscle contracting." Yet another theory describes the mystery creature as being a colony of tubifex worms, which can occur in pond sediment and also sewage when they work their way into the pipes. Since tubifex worms will flinch from bright lights, it is thought that this would explain the reaction of the creature in the footage to the camera light. Other investigators have disagreed with the tubifex worm theory due to several apparent problems with this explanation. It is pointed out that there is not a single individual worm to be seen on or around any of the three objects in the video. Instead, the creatures appear to be smooth, complete cysts or sacs that move and throb or pulsate as a complete entity rather than a loose mass of worms. What is this strange creature? It appears that for all of the ideas put forth about what the real explanation is for the North Carolina sewer monster, the story is still somewhat of a mystery, and no single explanation has totally satisfied everyone. Giant rats of Tehran. Several reports from Tehran, Iran, have described supersized rats emerging from the sewers to roam the streets, with some specimens claimed to be up to 11 pounds. It has been speculated that winter snows raised the water levels of the sewers and flushed the creatures out. Not only are the rats huge, but they also allegedly exhibit unusual physical characteristics. Tehran City Council Environment Advisor Ismail Karam told an Iranian website that the rats seem to be mutated, possibly from chemicals in the sewers. Karam said of the rats, "They are now bigger and look different. These are changes that normally take millions of years of evolution. They have jumped from 60 grams to 5 kilos, and cats are now smaller than them." According to an article in the Huffington Post from April 3, 2013, a Dr. David Baker, laboratory animal veterinarian at LSU, told them that he doubted that Tehran's rats were some kind of mutants. Instead, he suggested that even common types of rat can reach ridiculously large sizes under the right circumstances and that there are various types of giant rat around the world. Baker added, "During the Middle Ages, black rats in Europe reportedly grew large enough, and children were small enough, to carry off babies. Those had to have been some big rats. The rats in Tehran are reportedly so large that they have locals in a panic." In response to this, it has been reported that Tehran has actually hired teams of men armed with sniper rifles with infrared scopes to hunt down and exterminate the rodents. Whether the rats are mutated monsters or not, it nevertheless seems that Tehran has quite a rat problem. Giant spiders of Tokyo. Tokyo already has its share of giant sewer animals in the form of the giant rats that are said to inhabit various underground passages beneath the city. However, enormous rats might not be the only spooky creature to lurk in Tokyo's sewers. In the 1970s, Tokyo utilities workers came across a rather bizarre find along one sewer tunnel. While walking through one area, one of the workers felt his foot brush up against something unusual. Upon feeling at his leg to see what it was, his hand came away covered in thick spiderwebs, much to his surprise and horror. Upon illuminating and investigating the site, workers described seeing a vast web that hugged the ground and covered an area of several square meters. The web was littered with the numerous desiccated corpses of cockroaches as well as full-grown rats. Further investigation revealed a tunnel-like opening within a pile of refuse in the corner of the tunnel that allegedly measured at least 25 centimeters, about 10 inches, in diameter. The actual occupant of the web was never seen, and the perhaps understandably shaken workers did not intend to stick around to see it either, instead opting to leave. The account seems to describe perhaps the web of some sort of funnel web spider, although apparently much larger than any currently known to exist. It would be interesting to know, if the report is to be believed, just how big the mysterious spider of this web truly was. It would seem that there are a plenitude of mysteries in the dark, subterranean recesses of the world every bit as perplexing as those in the world above it. The expansive, meandering tunnels, tubes, and pipes beneath our feet are perhaps more than just barren, inky black places of concrete, garbage, effluence, and ephemera. Maybe they are the home of ancient, baffling mysteries of nature as well. As we continue as a species to build bigger and grander megametropolises, it is maybe a good idea to keep in mind that there is more to our cities than meets the eye. For far below our thrumming urban streets lies another weird world going about its own business, hidden from the eyes of humankind. Here is something that should be interesting, and keep in mind that I am not claiming any of the things I post to be totally true, as I am just an observer of the unusual, like the rest of you. Demons, jinn, and UFOs. In a new article here at Mysterious Universe, titled, "Did the CIA Possess Jinn-Infested Jewelry?" Jesse Woldman notes, one site I came across advertised a second-hand ring, for around $500. What I found particularly interesting was its description. It was claimed that the ring had been worn by a very successful CIA agent who had used the jinn contained inside to be promoted quickly within her department and enjoy many positive experiences in both her personal and professional life. For those who are not familiar with the jinn, they are ancient, supernatural creatures who, according to the Quran, are made of smokeless fire, and are typically hostile, manipulative, and even deadly. Woldman also notes of the CIA/second-hand ring story. This wacky item reminded me of rumors I'd heard previously about how the US government did indeed have a relationship with jinn and other entities, in an effort to try to harness these little understood powers for military gain. This is intriguing, since it dovetails very closely with my own research into how such potentially highly dangerous entities have been the subject of official, top-secret interest. Back in 2009, I met with a certain, elderly Dr. Mandir, who had invited me to his rundown home. Infinitely paranoid and deeply disturbing, Mandir had apparently been at the forefront of a quasi-official project tasked, in the early 1980s, with determining the truth behind the alien abduction phenomenon. To say that Mandir was obsessed with the world and lore of the jinn is not an understatement. Mandir, who believed the so-called greys of UFO lore were literal jinn, was also obsessed with trying to call forth and command jinn, surely a goal of definitively crackpot proportions. I told the story of the creepy doctor in my 2010 book, Final Events. But Mandir was apparently not the only member of this project that had a pressing desire to summon up supernatural entities hell-bent on tormenting the human race. The project was run by a group nicknamed the Collins Elite. Its real title still eludes me. I was introduced to its uncanny and dark world by an Anglican priest, who is also a former state director for MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, named Ray Boech. Back in January 2007, I interviewed Boech on this very issue of elements of officialdom trying to summon up, and even attempting to control, dangerous and malevolent entities for military benefit. As Ray revealed to me, in late 1991 he met with two members of the group, both physicists with the US Department of Defense, who told him a fascinating yet dangerous tale. In Ray's own words, I found it interesting because they had contacted me at work. And I have no idea how they tracked me down there. But, they wanted to know if we could get together and have lunch to discuss something important. I met them for a brief period of time on that first meeting, and then they said, we'd like to get together and have a longer conversation. I arranged a time and it was quite a lengthy discussion, probably 3.5 hours. And that's how it all came about. After both meetings, when I was able to verify that the men held the degrees they claimed to hold, and were apparently who they claimed to be, I was intrigued and excited at the possibility of having stumbled on a more or less untouched area which could be researched. But I was also cautious in terms of why me. And thus it was that Boech was plunged headlong into a strange and surreal world of classified Department of Defense projects, secret meetings, and follow-up dialogues with deep-throat-style sources, and stories of very disturbing encounters with what were described to him as NHEs, or non-human entities, which many within the UFO research community believe are aliens, but that certain elements of the DoD believe are nothing less than the deceptive minions of Satan, demons. I had no way of knowing before our face-to-face meeting if there was any legitimacy to this at all, Ray explained to me. I wasn't given any information at all before our meeting. Just the indication that they were involved in areas of research I would find interesting, and that they had some concerns they wished to discuss with me. And that's where everything turned decidedly dark and sinister, as Ray told me. They came to believe that the NHEs were not extraterrestrial at all. They believed they were some sort of demonic entities. And that regardless of how benevolent or beneficial any of the contact they had with these entities seemed to be, it always ended up being tainted, for lack of a better term, with something that ultimately turned out to be bad. There was ultimately nothing positive from the interaction with the NHE entities. Ray continued, they felt it really fell more under the category of some vast spiritual deception instead of UFOs and aliens. In the course of the whole discussion, it was clear that they really viewed this as having a demonic origin that was there to simply try and confuse the issue in terms of who they were, what they wanted, and what the source of the ultimate truth is. As Ray also noted, if you extrapolate from their take that these are demons in the biblical sense of the word, then what they would be doing here is trying to create a spiritual deception to fool as many people as possible. And as to how elements of the Dod were engaging the NHEs in some form of contact, Boech was given a truly strange and alarming story. From what they told me, it seemed like someone had invoked something and it opened a doorway to let these things in. That's certainly the impression they gave me. I was never able to get an exact point of origin of these sorts of experiments, or of their involvement, and when they got started. But I did get the impression that because of what they knew and the information that they presented, they had been involved for at least several years, even if the project had gone on for much longer. Ray also told me that those involved in the project sensed a dark cloud looming overhead. They were not wrong, there were deaths associated with the program. The NHEs proved to be highly deceptive and manipulative, and nothing good came from such dicey dabbling. And very much can be said about the jinn. Opening a doorway and allowing such a creature into one's life is pretty much akin to outright begging for trouble. Jesse Waldman's account of the CIA/second-hand ring story, the Dr. Mander saga, and the incredible account of Ray Boech, concerning the Pentagon and non-human entities known as NHEs, collectively suggest one thing, that officialdom has indeed secretly done its absolute utmost to engage, in near Faustian fashion, creatures from some poorly discernible realm, or realms, of existence. Some may call them demons. Others may refer to them as jinn. But, regardless of the name, they seem eerily similar, if not almost identical. That such entities clearly have an overwhelming hatred of us, however, suggests any kind of us and them interaction should be avoided at all costs. Let's hope, for all our sakes, officialdom has learned its lesson. But, somehow, I doubt it. As Jinn authority Rosemary Ellen Guiley notes, if you fear one thing in your life, fear the jinn.